The debate on the principles of P119 is now open. Deputy Gida, you indicated that you wish to speak first.
Yes, sir. Sorry, I would like to declare an interest as well. It's very, very technical. I need to make sure that it's the case. Do you mind if I ask the Minister for confirmation?
Yes, whether you need to declare one is normally a matter for the chair, but I confess.
I can ask you.
Well, I think the Minister might be better placed. The view I take on this is that merely having an interest in what is an enveloped property is a matter that will be common to a significant number of people, so it doesn't require a withdrawal, but a declaration, very possibly.
Okay, then in that case, I will just declare my interest, sir.
Very well. Deputy IA.
Thank you, sir. The Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel undertook a review of the draft taxation envelope property transactions law during a reduced time frame following the lodging of P119 prior to the Christmas period. Early indications of the contents of the draft law were provided to the panel in November of last year, and an officer briefing being received on the 10th of December. Prior to its lodging, the panel was advised that the Minister was consulting with stakeholders on the draft law and updating it to match the views being expressed. The application of stamp duty to envelope properties has been a long-term consideration by the government, with ongoing review and consultation being outlined in recent government plans, with a wider review of stamp duty still being developed. However, it is impractical for the panel to conduct public scrutiny of legislation prior to its lodging, and it is regrettable that the Minister for Treasury and Resources has brought the proposition and supporting documents forward in such a short time frame, as it has limited the ability for public consultation by the panel. The panel would highlight that the lodging and reissue of key economic impact analysis in late January, with supplementary information on which economic calculations were based, does not appear to have allowed the Minister sufficient time to rectify all concerns raised by key stakeholders. Indeed, the Minister only last Thursday published a draft version of the Statements of Order. This would have certainly been useful to provide during consultation. Yet the time frame, 2 working days before this sitting, has meant the contents have not been possible to scrutinise. The Minister has maintained that enough has been done to consult upon and fine-tune the draft law. It is, however, somewhat worrying that she highlighted that, in her understanding, P119 would not be subject to Standing Order 72, limiting the Assembly's ability to refer the draft law to scrutiny. You have indicated to the panel, sir, that it does not appear that P119 is barred from the scrutiny process, and it may be open to further examination if necessary. To be clear, we do not plan to call in the draft law. However, should the Assembly have concerns or queries, the Minister should provide comprehensive answers within her summing up. During our review of the draft law, we received written submissions from key stakeholders, including Jersey Finance, the Fiscal Strategy Group, legal and property professionals, and put questions to the Minister at a public hearing. I will not outline all of the details of the review during this speech. They can be found in our lodged comments paper. But it is fair to say that the introduction of the envelope property transaction tax is a contentious issue within some industries on the island. However, the primary concerns of the panel have now been addressed, as I will now outline. Firstly, the panel was made aware that changes to the Companies Law 1991, proposed within the draft law, would create uncertainty and complexity around the transfer of shares in a Jersey company. which may have risked such companies, and as such the island, becoming less attractive to international investors, which in turn would have a negative effect on Jersey's economy. The panel therefore lodged an amendment to remove these changes, which the Minister has consequently accepted. Secondly, the panel received representation of island industries which questioned the introduction of a new tax upon commercial property ownership, as well as the economic and practical impact of EPTT. The panel therefore lodged a second amendment to remove envelope commercial property from the scope of the new tax. This was on the basis that there was not enough supporting evidence to warrant its debate. However, the Minister and Revenue Jersey have subsequently outlined specific exemptions of the tax and procedures of its implementation. As the amendment would greatly alter the purpose of the draft law, and on the provision of further information, the panel has robustly discussed its position and after consideration has decided to withdraw its proposed removal of commercial properties from the scope of the draft law. Lastly, the panel was concerned that the Minister had lodged an acte operatoire which would have allowed immediate implementation of the new tax. The Minister has since lodged an amendment to clarify that the draft law will not come into force until the 4th of April 2022. We are pleased that this course of action has been taken, as it will allow time for the Minister to provide guidance on the procedures concerning the new tax, both within Revenue Jersey and for those performing transactions, including envelope properties. This will also allow for the completion of any transactions currently underway, as the enactment of the acte operatoire had come as a surprise to industry. The panel concludes that whilst the introduction of envelope property transaction tax is a complicated and somewhat controversial piece of legislation, the principle of the proposed introduction of the new tax is based upon the intended goal of ensuring broadly equivalent treatment across similar types of transactions involving land in Jersey. The panel is of the opinion that the introduction of new taxation should always receive ample consideration. Although the Minister has advised the panel that envelope property transaction tax is a simple method of closing the gap of paying stamp duty or land transaction tax as an individual or company, it will introduce a new charge for those purchasing companies which own property in Jersey. The panel has deduced from the content of the written submissions received and amendments required that the Minister should have provided comprehensive detail and engaged further with key stakeholders on the draft law prior to the proposition being lodged. Questions remain regarding the practical and economic impact of the draft law on this segment of the economy. The timetable that the Minister adopted for the preparation and release of the economic impact analysis has restricted the ability to address concerns regarding the economic consequences of adopting the draft law. The panel is presently minded to support the draft law, since the Minister has accepted our first amendment and has incorporated the third amendment. It is conscious, however, that the tax is complex and may be regarded as controversial by some. I hope that all members have had the opportunity to read our comments paper and will give due consideration to it before making their final determination. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy of Woodville.
Thank you, sir. I wouldn't describe this as controversial. I would describe this as a law of fairness. And I'm grateful to the Treasury and Resources Minister for bringing it forward. It can't be right that under our existing rules to pay neither stamp duty nor land transaction tax where ownership of Jersey real estate is transferred by way of transfer of shares. While the majority of property transactions in our island are subject to stamp duty or LTT, there is a small but seemingly growing number that are free from any charge at all. The outcome is that two otherwise equivalent property transactions can face two completely different tax outcomes. One is taxed and the other is not. There are perfectly legitimate reasons for property to be enveloped, but it cannot be right, as happens now, that such different outcomes arise from having this inconsistency in our legislation. And there is currently undoubtedly an incentive to envelope property purely to secure a tax advantage. The issue was first raised in the budget in 2018 and also in the budget 2019 and the government plan. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that the time frame has been short. The new tax will mainly affect commercial transactions because, again, it cannot be right that a first-time buyer, for instance, is paying stamp duty on their first property, yet some not insubstantial commercial properties pay absolutely nothing. So if we don't support it, we'll be allowing this inconsistent treatment to continue and effectively inviting all owners of commercial property to envelope. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I have just two brief points, if I may, sir. The first is that throughout reference has been made to the phrase used most commonly has been one of tax avoidance. I think it's only fair to put on record that many of these structures are set up not to avoid tax, but for genuine commercial reasons. And I think it would be unfair to assume that everyone indulging in this mechanism is seeking to avoid tax. It may well be that the outcome is to avoid tax, but that is not necessarily the motive. The other brief point I make, sir, is that as the previous speaker has just said, this legislation has been long in the gestation period, if I might put it that way. I recall shortly after I first joined the state some 7 years ago, it was brought before the Assembly fairly early on and was shelved. Those having the benefit of an enveloped property knew, and their professional advisors certainly must have known for some years, therefore, that it was on the cards and it will be coming soon. So in that respect, I can't say I have too much sympathy for the argument that it's been thrust upon them without enough notice. There's been ample time to rectify it before now, and with that, sir, I shall be supporting the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Sullivan.
Thank you, sir. And that's just a few simple questions. I hope they're simple questions to get my head around what's happening here. We talk about broadly levelling off taxation. There's three types of tax: stamp duty, LTT, and EPT. Where is it a simple comparison that you can make to compare the thresholds and the rates of tax being paid on particular properties in any of those groups? And secondly, I note that you were going to put £1 million in a housing fund, and yet your estimates of how much revenue this will generate is up to 5 million. And I was just wondering why you couldn't decide to put a little more in the housing fund to alleviate, in a little way, our crisis there, rather than keep it at 1 million.
Any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the principles? Conor St. One. I beg your pardon, Deputy St. One.
Thank you, sir. Yes, some speakers have spoken about this issue being around for a long time. I can confirm it's certainly been around since the early years of this current century, because I recall being a lawyer in practice when the Treasury were seeking views of lawyers on taxing properties which were held by way of share transfer, because it was recognized in the legal profession, recognized by government, that effectively transfers of immovable property were happening, but not being taxed in the same way as freehold transfers. The effect was the same. People had the enjoyment of their property, but because they happened to hold it by way of a shareholding, the law at that time did not reach those transactions. There was no stamp duty applicable. So a consultation took place. Lawyers were asked to, and I think I at that time was working on the conveyancing subgroup of the Law Society. We made a submission, and the upshot of it was at a very late stage, the Treasury announced that they were making some limited changes. They were going to charge a new tax to those properties which gave rights of occupation to residential accommodation. Effectively, those people who held a block of shares, and by holding that block of shares, that would give them the exclusive rights to occupy usually a flat in a multi-occupancy building. These are very typically the flats that have been converted out of former townhouses all around the town, typically occupied by first-time buyers, people with limited means. And the Treasury told us that that was because that they could reach those people. Those sort of companies had secretaries who were based in Jersey, but they hadn't found out a way of reaching the companies that might hold more complex portfolios of property and where secretaries and officers might be outside Jersey. So the result of that was that the land transaction tax of 2009 was introduced. That's how long ago we're going to, 2009. And we were assured, don't worry, because we recognize the inequality and we're working on it, and we expect very shortly to come forward with proposals for capturing the remaining companies where immovable property could be transferred without any taxation implications. So that was said in 2009, and we are now 13 years later. So I welcome at last what is being proposed today. It is sorely needed because it has been felt, certainly the lawyers working in the area felt this was unfair, it seemed, to our clients who were buying a flat, one of several flats in a converted townhouse, and they had to pay tax on it. But somebody could buy an office block or a shop in our town centre by way of share transfer, and there's no tax payable. So this measure today puts right that unfairness, and I'm pleased to see, and I hope the Assembly will support it. I know it has been contested. There is unease amongst the legal profession because, of course, there will be clients who don't wish to incur this bother of having to deal with paying tax to the government, and they're in the market where thus far they have not needed to. But it's absolutely right and fair that everybody should be treated the same. and all immovable property in the island should be treated in the same way. And I hope this might lead on to a time when eventually transacting in real property by way of shareholdings could really fall out of disuse, particularly when it comes to residential property for badly needed homes. And we could move to a situation where properties are held by way of flying freehold, which when it was introduced attracted stamp duty quite fairly. So this has taken a long time, sir, but it is right that at last it has come to fruition and we are restoring equality and at the same time making sure that the same return is paid on these transactions as is paid if the property in question was held on a freehold basis. So I urge members to support the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. It's a question, first of all, to be asked and answered hopefully in the summing up. It regards as to why we don't know what the income will be. I noticed from the financial and manpower implications, it says income from BPTT is uncertain, but revenue received up to £1 million per annum is proposed to be allocated to the Housing Development Fund. Just to clarify, first of all, does that mean that that's what they estimate the income to be? It will be up to £1 million, which is in itself a vague sum. So it could be anything under 1 million. And does it mean that if there's more than that that's raised, only £1 million will go into the Housing Development Fund? I don't know if that's what Deputy Southern was also asking. And I suppose just another observation is that it's interesting that this is clearly a tax avoidance mechanism. I heard what the Deputy of St Mary's said, but the long and short of it is it's a tool and a loophole which is being closed, which allowed some people, depending on how they organised their property through a company, to not pay tax, whilst others would have to do that. That's clearly an unfair practice, and it's also losing revenue for the government of Jersey to be spent on the public good. So it's only right that that be shut. But it is interesting to note that it was deemed to be controversial and that it's taken a long time to do. And it perhaps shows where the vested interests are in Jersey, because if it was something like raising indirect taxation, and there are very many forms of it now, that often gets nodded through every year in the budget. But when it comes to these kind of mechanisms, it's much more difficult, it would seem. And we know that there are ways to arrange one's finances. The example I always give is that a company can claim, doesn't have to declare its it declares its expenditure, and it only gets taxed on its profits. And of course, in Jersey, it doesn't get taxed on its profits anyway. It only gets taxed on the distributed income. So any money that a company spends on a company car, on a premises, of course, that can be put down as a business expense. But when you have to spend things on your own running costs, whether it's your food, your car or your home, of course, you get taxed on your income, albeit with some allowances. So I'm glad to see that this is being done. I don't see what all the fuss was about, and maybe it's the start of things to come.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the principles? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, sir, and thank you very much to those who have taken the trouble to speak. It's very helpful. Firstly, to Deputy Ayo, Chair of the Scrutiny Review Panel for this particular law. And I did say in my opening remarks that there was a controversy about this, and I do find it a little bit difficult to appreciate the lack of time when, as several speakers have already said, that it's been in the pipeline I think the Deputy for St Warren said 2009, but my predecessor, Treasury Minister, brought it to the Assembly in 2018. It was repeated again in 19 and again in the government plan of 2020. So there has been a lot of time for consultation. And again, as I said in my opening remarks, a lot of it was because stakeholders were quite slow to come forward. But anyway, I very much appreciate Deputy Ayer's comments and the work of his panel, the attendance of briefings, and also a States Members briefing, which we had on the 31st of January. Deputy Labby hit the nail on the head. It's a law of fairness. Sorry, Deputy of Grouville. And again, repeated the inconsistency about the timing, which I mentioned in my speech. Deputy Johnson again mentioned a long...
Deputy of St Mary.
Sorry, sir. Deputy of St Mary. Long gestation period, and I won't go over all that again. Deputy Southern, I think, was asking the same question as Deputy Tadier, and as one can tell by the numbers that I quoted, somewhere between 2.4 and 5.3 million, it'll be clear to the Assembly that it is a forecast without an awful lot of data to back it up. And that is the reason why, with a bit more information than we originally had, which quoted about £1 million, it's now, if we can only estimate that it's between 30 and 40 transactions that go through a year, then that will give the Assembly and listeners the realisation of how difficult it is to give a precise estimate. And when we originally had the £1 million quote, it was immediately put to the Housing Development Fund. That stays the same until we have a better idea of what the forecast could be. So that's a combination of just not knowing what kind of revenue we will have, that will become more apparent later on. Deputy of St Warren, again, the long time in discussion, as I've already mentioned, since 2009. So it's in my view and that of my fellow ministers and officials, revenue officials, that it's very much time that this inaccuracy, this gap, this loophole was corrected. And one can see from the States Members briefing, one of the slides, which indicated that £3.2 million was a revenue in 2015 in stamp duty. By 2020, that had reduced to £123,000. So there's, it's definitely an excuse, is the enveloping at the moment to avoid the tax. With which, sir, I ask the Assembly to approve the amended principles.
Yes. Well, I think, will you give way for that further clarification, Minister?
Yes, I don't have the figures as yet. As I think I explained, it's very difficult to forecast what will the revenue be.
I think Deputy Southern is asking, are the rates applicable in these transactions the same or equivalent to the rates applicable for LTT and for stamp duty? And are the thresholds in respect of which cut off supply for those things the same for these transactions as well? Does that correctly summarise your question? Yes, I think that was the question. It could be, Minister, that you don't have the information, but if you are able to answer it, that was the Deputy's question, I believe.
Thank you, sir. I'm sorry I didn't answer all of the Deputy's question. The levels are £500,000 for residential property, £700,000 for commercial property. But as to the detailed figures, I will ask the department to get back to the Deputy with those. Thank you, sir.
Very well. Very well. I'll ask the greffier to put a vote into the link. Open the voting and ask members to vote. If members have had the opportunity of casting their votes, then I ask the referee to close the voting. Senator Ferguson, are you against or abstaining? Because you say abstain, and it's not entirely you're abstaining, right, thank you. The principle's been adopted, 38 votes pour, no votes contre, 1 abstention in the link, and a further 2 votes pour and 1 abstention in the chat. Deputy IA, you indicate you're not calling this matter in?
No, we are not, sir.
Very much. How do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading, Minister?
Thank you, sir. If it's acceptable to members, I wish to propose the articles en bloc as amended.
Yes. Well, there's your amendment, so you'd like to take that as amended, your particular amendment.
Yes, please, sir.
There's also the amendment you're accepting from the panel.
Yes, please, sir.
Do members agree that that the articles can be taken as amended? If anyone doesn't agree, could they indicate in the chat? Point of order, Mr. Deputy Tadier.
Yeah, thank you, sir. It's something I should have raised earlier, but I've only just thought of it. When there was at least one member earlier who asked a point regarding declaring an interest, but I'm not sure whether they actually did declare an interest or if they
Yes, they did.
They did. What did they say? What the interest was, sir?
No, they simply declared the interest, and but there was a declaration of interest. Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's the point of order, though, Deputy. But there we are. So, how do you wish to deal with the matters in second? I'm assuming that members are content to take the articles as amended, and no one's indicated that they don't want to do that. Deputy Young, do you want to say something about that?
Yes, please. Article 22. I've not heard an answer from the Minister. Maybe I missed it. I apologise as to why we need to delay the implementation by the 4th of April, which is the amendment, the third amendment to Article 22.
So you would like to? Would you like to then have a separate vote on Article 22? In other words, you don't agree the amendment being made?
Yes, sir. I think so.
Well, I think in which case, Minister, will have to deal with that as an amendment when we come to those particular article.
That's just Article 22, sir.
That's the only one that's been raised at the moment. Deputy, yes, that's where we are. Deputy Tadier, you have a reiteration of your point of order?
Yeah, the reason I asked it, sir, is it seems to me that if we are to declare interest, it's important to know what the interests are in order for you to be able to rule what the right outcome is. Because if we simply say, for example, if it was a housing matter and I say I've got an interest, that could be an interest as a tenant or a landlord, and we normally say that. And in this case, you'd expect to know if somebody's directly affected by this, if they have enveloped property, which is going to change, or to determine the right course of action. But I think either way, it should be something for the public record, sir.
Yes, I think that's probably correct, Deputy, that there should be some general understanding as what the nature of an interest is if it's declared. So, Deputy Giddy, you declared that you had an interest. Are you able to state in very general terms what's the nature of that interest?
Yes, of course, sir. I own companies which, among other things, own real estate.
Very well. And that's the only declaration that's been received, I believe, from anyone who's participating.
As Senator Moore also made a declaration of, just for completeness.
Ah, yes. Senator Moore, are you still participating in the debate?
I did withdraw, sir, but I was just rejoining as I could see it was coming to an end.
Well, on the principles it is. Are you able to indicate the nature of the interest that you declared earlier, in very general terms?
Yes, of course. I live in a shared transfer property, and I own the adjoining properties, which are also shared transfer.
They may or may not be affected by this tax. They may be affected by the LTT tax, I suppose. But in any event, that's the nature of your interest. Thank you very much indeed, Senator. Does anyone else wish to declare an interest? Very well, then we'll move on. With the exception of Article 20, the last article, isn't it? The excuse me, Article 22, which we will take separate. We'll take the amendments separately. We'll deal with the other article that's in which respect of which you've accepted the amendment, Minister, as amended. So how do you wish to deal with them then? Do you wish to propose the articles?
Yes, please, sir.
And do you wish to speak to them, or do you wish to take questions on them?
I can take questions if people have them, but it'd be quite a lengthy address to speak to each one.
Well, it's a matter for you entirely how you choose to deal with the matter.
I'll wait for the Assembly. If they have questions, I will.
Very well. So you propose the articles en bloc with the exception of, well, no, you propose the articles en bloc, and then we come to that when we come to, excuse me a moment. Yes, I think what we'll do is then you'll propose articles 1 to 21, and I'll ask if those are seconded, and then we'll come on to Article 22 in due course.
Thank you,
Very well. So Article 1 to 21 are proposed. Are they seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on any of Articles 1 to 21?
So I just have a point of understanding.
Is this,
Well,
sorry,
is
this clarification from the Minister?
I think it
or
would have to
from-
be clarification, sir. I was
Well,
trying to discuss
from the
it
Minister.
from the Minister. Article 22 as amended. If that falls, what's the consequence of that? Do we
Well,
go back to the unamended version?
At the moment, Article 22 is not being proposed.
Okay, apologies, sir.
When we reach the point when Article 22 is proposed, the Minister will propose her amendment, which will defer the commencement of the law until April. If that amendment is accepted, that's when the law will come into effect. If the amendment is rejected, then it will come into effect as soon as it receives the royal assent.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad I asked the question now. Thank you.
Yes, if that assists. Yes, does any member wish to speak on Articles 1 to 21? No member wishes to speak on any of those articles? Then I close the debate and ask for a voting link to be put in the chat. I open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Articles 1 to 21 have been adopted, 37 votes for, no votes contra, 1 abstention in the link, and a further 3 votes for in the chat. We now come on to Article 22. Do you propose that, Minister?
Yes, please, sir.
And is that seconded?
Yes, sir.
And you propose, would you like to speak to your amendment, Minister?
Yes, please, sir, but I think you answered the questions very eloquently yourself. It's purely because, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, without my amendments, then the legislation would come into effect up to 7 days after it is hopefully agreed by this Assembly. And because of concern expressed mainly by legal authorities, with, as I said in my opening remarks, transactions, some underway, we thought an extension to the 4th of April would satisfy those requirements. So that's why we've brought it. Thank you, sir.
Ron, so does anyone wish to speak on the amendment? This is the amendment to Article 22. Deputy Young.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes, the query I wanted to raise, and I apologise if I missed it in the Minister's opening remarks. Obviously, this started out as where we had the usual Taxation Act, that this law was going to be, this new tax would be brought in the usual way, immediately effect, just as if it does an income tax and every other tax we've done. And yet what I'm troubled about is that it's heard that, well, we've had representations from, I'm not sure where those representations have come from, but I assume that they're persons who have an interest in transactions that are in progress, that they wish not to have the tax applied. Of course, we'd heard earlier from the Deputy of St. Juan, and indeed the Minister, that these proposals have been known about for many, many years. And they should not have come as a surprise. So I put it rather stronger than the Minister. I think, I'm concerned about this, so at least I'd like to hear further from the Minister on that article, please, to reassure me that all is okay to put this off for effectively quite a few weeks.
Well, thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. I think I was going to ask a similar question, which is why the date's given of the, I think it's the 22nd of April. I just closed the comment when the 4th of April. Sorry, sir. Why that date? And is there a risk of a rush of transactions before that date, which means that this could be counterintuitive to what we're trying to achieve in this sort of tax, which I fully support. And I think it does make things fairer, and I'm absolutely in favour of it. So it's just that question really about why the date and would there be a rush of transactions? Thank you, sir.
Well, Senator Falwell.
Yes, thank you, sir. Just I was a member of the panel that scrutinised this particular legislation, and if I can assist the two previous speakers in any way, there have been concerns raised, and I would like to address this misnomer about this has been in gestation and all those types of things for many years, because yes, it may have been an idea, yes, it may have been something that would be considered at some point in the future, but the legislation wasn't lodged, so it wasn't finalised until recently. And so, sir, I would hope that many members, being politicians and parliamentarians, are part of a legislative assembly, would understand the importance of semantics in legislation and the way that legislation is written in law. And some of the concerns that were raised was, of course, the issuance of guidance that sits around the implications of the legislation that are coming in. So there was a concern expressed about the length of time that would be given, and actually the Act Operatoire was actually brought in as a surprise to those who would be required to carry out the necessary administration, which is absolutely right to do so. And yes, it would usually be a case of us carrying out tax legislation following a government plan. But sir, there hasn't been sufficient information within the government plan about what the detail around that would be. So it would be deemed appropriate to give sufficient time to enable that guidance that will be issued by Revenue Jersey to be issued and understood, so that the legal responsibilities that are required under the legislation that will be passed are appropriately administered. I hope that assists the speakers in terms of this particular amendment, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Point to St. John.
Thank you, sir. I wonder if the Minister, in her summing up, can tell us about the financial and manpower implications, because in the amendment it says, by itself, this amendment is not expected to have resource implications, but we're being told there'll be a loss of revenue. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the amendment to Article 22? No other member wishes to speak on that amendment? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond on the matter of the amendment. Minister.
So we're unable to hear the Minister. She seems to be muted.
Oh, that's because I didn't put my speaker on. Thank you. So I was thanking Senator Bulwell very much indeed for her comprehensive explanation. And also the 4th of April date is largely because it's 2 months away from this debate. And the Law Society are now happy with this. As I say, it was sort of legal and accountancy firms are a little concerned about the Act operatoire being implemented within 7 days of the law being approved. So we've accommodated that to allow transactions already in place. In answer to Deputy Ward's, will there be a rush? These are transactions that are already in place to allow them to be fulfilled, which is what we were asked to do. So that's why it was moved to that date. I hope that answers all the questions. Thank you.
Very much. Well, then I ask the greffier to put a vote into the link. The vote is on whether or not Article 22 may be amended, and then that will be followed by a vote on Article 2 in its amended or unamended form. So the vote is, do we allow the matter to be taken as amended? I open the voting and ask members to vote. It says in the link Article 22 is amended. That's not actually correct. The vote is on whether Article 22 can be amended. So the vote is, if members vote pour, then we will have a vote on whether we adopt Article 22 as amended. If they vote contre, then it will be a vote on whether Article 22 is passed unamended. I open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Ask the greffier to close the voting. Article 22, the amendment is adopted. 38 votes for, 2 votes contre, 1 abstention in the link, and a further 2 votes for in the chat. We now vote on Article 22 as amended. I ask the greffier when it's convenient to put a vote into the link. I open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. Article 22 as amended has been adopted. For 39 votes, contra 0 votes, no abstentions in the link, and 1 vote for and 1 abstention in the chat. Very well. Do you propose the law in third reading, Minister? And is it seconded for third reading?
It is, sir.
Does any member wish to speak in third reading? If no one wishes to speak in third reading, then I close the debate and ask the greffier to post a vote into the link. I open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law has been adopted in third reading, 38 votes for, no votes contre, 1 abstention in the link, and a further 1 vote for in the chat. The next item of public...
Excuse me,
yes?
just please acknowledge my thanks to the states members who have contributed, and also the officers in Revenue Jersey for the enormous amount of work that's gone into the preparation of this, and also the scrutiny panel chaired by Deputy IA for their helpful and well-organised comments, briefings and hearings. Thank you very much, sir.
Very much indeed. The next item of public business is the draft Social Security Amendment of Law Minimum Earnings Threshold number 2, the Regulations P120, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Social Security Amendment of Law Minimum Earnings Threshold number 2, Jersey Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Articles 50 and 51 of the Social Security Jersey Law 1974.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. In December last year, states members agreed to replace the hourly threshold with a pound threshold to employers and employees to start paying Social Security contributions. The earnings threshold was introduced on the 1st of January this year, 22. During the debate on the minimum earnings threshold, I confirmed that I would bring back regulations to the States Assembly which will enable the threshold to change each year in line with any changes to the minimum wage. These regulations, if adopted, will mean that the minimum earnings threshold will change on the 1st of January each year by the same percentage change in the minimum wage during the previous year, up until including the 1st of January. So I maintain the principles and I'll try and answer any questions if anybody has them. Thank you.
Sorry, I was distracted. Minister, is that the end of your proposing the principles?
Yes, sir. I propose the principles.
Are the principles seconded? Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I have just one point. My understanding is that in line with the increase in the living wage, there is taken into account each year, or has been, the offset in respect of any accommodation available for, shall I say, seasonal workers. Would the Minister please explain or clarify whether that figure is going to be similarly increased automatically? I asked the question partly because I think last year it might not have been, and I would appreciate confirmation as to that, and indeed as to the mechanics as to how that is agreed. Thank you, sir.
Much. Does any other member wish to speak on the principles? No other member wishes to speak on the principles? Then I close the debate and call upon the Minister to respond.
Thank you, and thank you, sir. And I'll try my best to answer the Deputy of Deputy of St Mary. Yes, I take soundings from the Employment Forum, who last year went out on the minimum wage and the disregards for accommodation and food, and they came back with a recommendation not to change that because it wasn't being, in fact, many weren't using it. This is completely different. This is used to be able to work 8 hours and not really declare anything. That had to go to money. So with everything else that's changing, etc., etc. And in scrutiny, I think it was Senator Alva that suggested this could get stuck. The 8 hours was 8 hours since the introduction of Social Security, so for 40 odd years or more, or it was introduced further down the line, but it just got stuck. So this will make the monetary value go up every year, so it's worth having. So I hope that answers questions, and I ask for the appel.
You'll ask the Secretary to place a voting link into the chat. They open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. And I ask the greffier to close the voting. Principles have been adopted. 36 votes pour, no votes contra, no abstentions in the link, and a further 1 vote pour in the chat. Deputy Lehagaraj, your panel is, do you wish to call this in?
No, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Then how do you wish to deal with the matter in second reading?
En bloc, sir, please.
Right, do you wish to answer any questions?
Yes, sir. They are very straightforward, and really what I've said is exactly the few regulations will bring it into force. Thank you.
Is it seconded for second reading? Does any member wish to speak in second reading? No member wishes to speak in second reading. Then I close the debate and ask the greffier to place a vote into the link. Sure. How are we doing on voting, Griffin? Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the referee to close the voting. The regulations have been adopted in second reading. 35 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions in the link, and a further 2 votes for in the chat. You propose the matter in third reading, Minister?
Yes, please, sir. Propose in the third reading.
Are they seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak in third reading? Then I close the debate and ask the greffier to place a vote into the link. I open the voting and ask members to vote. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The regulations are adopted in third reading. 38 votes for, no votes contra, no abstentions in the link, and a further 2 votes for in the chat. Before moving on to the next item of business, members might have noticed that there has been a flurry of discussion in connection with the draft taxation enveloped property transactions. In the breakdown of the schedules, in the breakdown of the articles, we forgot to vote for the schedules. The schedules are, the articles simply foreshadow the schedules, but it is normal to have a vote on the schedules specifically. Although arguably they are incorporated by incorporating the articles, it is normal to vote for the articles and the schedule. So I propose, if members have no objection, to put the question of the schedules to a vote, simply to record the fact that they have been voted on.
Yes, sorry, sir. I did see the schedule and I should have mentioned it. So I think it is.
That's all right. This is in connection with the one beforehand.
Oh, okay.
So, Minister, may I assume you propose the schedules?
Yes, please, sir.
Are the schedules seconded? Any member wish to speak to any of the schedules? I'm prepared to deal with this on a standing vote, as Deputy Tadier helpfully suggests. Oh, people are actually standing up. All those in favour, would they indicate? And if anyone wishes to indicate against or wishes the matter to be put to the appel, would they indicate in the chat? So it's difficult to tell if you're standing up at home.
Like I say, I can confirm I'm standing up virtually, sir.
Right. Very well. No one is contra, so we will take that on a standing vote. The schedules have been adopted. Thank you very much indeed. Very well. The next item is the rent safe scheme, P121, lodged by Senator Moore. And I ask the greffier to read the proposition. It might help, I think. Senator, there's an amendment. Are you accepting that amendment from Deputy Ward?
Yes, I am, sir.
So are members content to take the proposition as amended? In which case, I'll ask the greffier to read the proposition as amended.
The states are asked to decide whether they are of opinion to request the Minister for the Environment to bring forward such legislative amendments as are necessary to make it legally mandatory that all landlords registered with the current rent safe scheme and are accredited under the scheme in order to rent out property, and B, to develop a process for the regular renewal of rent safe registration based on a risk rating approach to determine the frequency and order of inspections of rental dwellings.
Yes, you say you want to speak, Deputy Young. Is that?
I was going to ask for the amendment to be dealt with separately, sir, but I accept it's too late and I'll deal with it as is now.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Very well. Yes.
May I, sir?
Senator.
Thank you. So firstly, sir, I do have to start by declaring that I am a landlord. I think that's important, and I'm sure that, as is probably the norm, there will be a number of other members who are in a similar circumstance. Should we offer them the opportunity?
So you've made the declaration you're a landlord. Does anyone else wish to make a similar declaration?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So
Yes, sir.
the Constable
Yes,
Group
sir.
Bill, Deputy St Peter. I think instead of saying yes, would people identify who they are so it can be Hansarded?
Constable of St Clement.
You.
Deputy of Trinity.
Deputy of Trinity.
Senator Lepondre.
Yes.
Deputy of St Mary.
Deputy Young also has declared.
Constable of St Mary.
Yes. Deputy of St Mary. So Deputy of St Martin has declared. Deputy Pinnell, Deputy Guida. Deputy Morell.
So Councillor St Warnes declares I declare interest, and also that I'm a member of the rent safe scheme as well.
Yes. Connétable of St Helier. Deputy of Grouville. Deputy of St Juan. Deputy Tadier. Very well. That's a fairly comprehensive declaration. I'm not a landlord. Very well. If the Assembly would excuse that flippancy. Yes, Senator.
Thank you, sir. So, as is the norm, we're all able to continue and take part in this debate. Sir, I also register my properties under the rent safe scheme, and it's in experiencing that I recognise that the rent safe scheme is an easy, straightforward process, and it's all about setting minimum standards, but also offering clarity to the users, the tenants, much as the Eat Safe scheme has been exceptionally helpful in terms of environmental health and standards for restaurants, offering certainty to people dining in those restaurants. It was with some difficulty that I voted against the licensing scheme that the Minister brought last time, but my reason for doing so, which was stated at the time, sir, was because of the cost that I could see of implementing that scheme, and it appeared to me to be a strange thing when we have a well-recognised and established system to introduce something in addition to it. So, sir, I have throughout this process engaged with the Landlords Association and the Minister and officers. Initially, the Minister and officers suggested that this was too complex because it cuts across to ministers and the legislation that sits under each of them. I found that quite a difficult thing to understand, because I thought we had introduced OneGov and a simplified approach to managing our government processes. So that was somewhat disappointing. But now I'm told that last week the Minister for the Environment, the Minister for Housing and Communities has now lodged drafting instructions for a new residential tenancy law to be produced in its entirety. But that, of course, now due to the timing of this assembly, will be something that is pushed off into the next assembly and the next minister's work. And it is my view that we can achieve this in a much quicker and simpler fashion if the Assembly is so minded. Of course, the Assembly will also have an opportunity to debate and consider Senator Mezek's proposals with regards to tenancy periods. That will come down the way. The Landlords Association, in their comments that they've sent to members, which I thank them, suggest that this will be burdensome and too difficult, as they suggest a number of about 20,000 properties that are rented in the island, although that contradicts or conflicts with the suggestion from the Minister in his comments that there would be about 10,000 properties to inspect. But of course, this proposition is based on a risk-based scheme, therefore enabling the environmental health team to focus on those properties that they do think are most at risk, and therefore managing their time wisely under those standards which are used in other places, so they're well understood. The JLA also suggests that a register and an education programme for both tenants and landlords would be sufficient. Clearly, there is more to be done in terms of bringing properties that are rented to tenants up to standard in the island, and I do not feel that a register and education programme would be sufficient. And it is, in my view, sensible and reasonable to be transparent to tenants about the standard of their property that they are proposing to rent, and also to place that burden upon the landlord. The Rent Safe scheme is, as I said earlier, a minimum standard scheme. It's simply asking that properties meet the standards that are set underneath the law, standards such as having an electrical certificate, and then those that are given the higher star ratings also have greater energy efficiency standards, which their tenants can obviously benefit from in terms of the savings that they would receive from a cost-efficient heating system and the benefit of double glazing, insulation, etc. I do hope you're hearing me okay, sir. I get the impression that perhaps you're not.
Yes, I'm sorry. Of course, I can hear you. Yes, Senator, I'm afraid I'm slightly distracted, and I apologise. But we can.
I do. Okay, sorry. I know that my voice isn't carrying as well as it ordinarily would. I've almost finished. So I'm sure that members will have a lot to say on this matter. It is my view that this is a solutions-based approach. It delivers for the public something that is long waited for, and I look forward to debate and commend the idea to the Assembly.
Thank you very much, Senator. Is it seconded? Yes. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? No member wishes to speak on the proposition. Deputy Labby.
So I did see Deputy Young's request from earlier on, so you might have missed it.
I did. They come up in a slightly different order for me sometimes. Deputy Labby, and then I've got Deputy Young after that.
Okay, so sorry, I haven't got my jacket on yet. The main responder to this this proposition is Deputy Young. I just
for those reasons you would like to do. You feel you should go first.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Well, I don't have any difficulty with that, as you're the main responder, Deputy Young. Yes, Deputy Young.
Thank you, sir. I had held back because I was hoping that the proposer of the amendment, which is we're now debating this as amended, would speak. But anyway, so I'd like to begin by thanking both Senator Moore and Deputy Ward for bringing back, if you like, for our attention, this crucial issue about minimum accommodation standards of housing. And it's absolutely a vital one for the island. And of course, although we live in a prosperous island, unfortunately, the evidence is that we find that some of our housing stock that in the rental market is not up to the standards that the current legislature has set, or even what islanders deserve. And so I hope members will have had the opportunity to read the detailed comments on the original unamended proposition, which I asked to be worked up for me by our environmental health team, who are, I think, the absolute experts in this field. They are the team that have advanced all the previous proposals that I have brought forward, although sadly I have failed to persuade the Assembly with them, but they have to deal with these problems on a continual basis, and they know how to deal with these matters very well. And of course, so that proposition sets down what we believe, or what they advise, would be the effect if the proposition is approved. And indeed, of course, under the amendment as well, those problems as terms of practical difficulties and complications and delay would be compounded very, very significantly by the amendment. But of course, now we only have the choice to decide yay or nay on the amended proposition. At first sight, when I first saw the proposition, I have to say, and I suspect most members were the same, I thought, well, you know, this seems a very nice idea that we could just do that. And then you looked at the small print, because what does the proposition say? It says to bring forward legislative amendments to make it legally mandatory. Legally mandatory. So that means compulsory, that all landlords register with the current rent scheme. So the scheme as it is, that's been running successfully for a number of years, on a voluntary basis, designed by the environmental health team, would become law. And of course that rent safe scheme, and I'm in it as well. And of course, you go around town, you'll see the little stickers on the estate agents' doors, and it's been successfully taken up by approximately 2,000 dwellings. And the majority of those are at the top level of the standards. In fact, of course, there are none at the fail standards. They're all at level 3, and there are level 4 and level 5, where they meet the even more enhanced standards, which of course are not enshrined in law. And so what I tried to do in the comments was to make the point about what the effect would be, is that it wasn't a question that sits above the different ministers. Frankly, that's not any problem at all. Minister of Housing and I work together all the time. In fact, we've worked together. The forward plan that the Minister of Housing will talk about in a minute, which I think offers much more simpler and effective and quicker solutions to us all, along with the current legislation that we've had in place. No, but the problem is in reality that we've got a couple of different laws. Just to remind you, one of those laws is the Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Minimum Standards law. That was passed before I was elected minister by the previous states. And obviously what I needed to do was to bring forward regulations to put it into practice. And it's those regulations which have failed to find approval with Assembly twice, even though they were accepted as being needed in principle on a debate we had in the meantime on a proposition of Deputy Ward, because they were seen as too complex, too bureaucratic, too onerous. Again, you know, views being expressed, strong views by the Jersey landlords, and obviously those views weighed very, very heavily with members as to why those regulations didn't go through. So not only if we were to make rent safe law mandatory, not just would it need to comply with the Public Health Rental Dwellings Minimum Standards law, but also the existing residential tenancy laws. And so there's a bit of a difference there. One law deals with self-contained dwellings, the other one deals with self-contained and non-self-contained dwellings. Similarly, there are a lot of different exceptions. And there's also the issue of legislating for energy efficiency. Absolutely a first-class objective to do something, have policies on energy efficiencies. Therefore, issues that we're going to talk about in the Island Plan, planning policies, building control regulations, and in the carbon neutral strategy to come, all those issues. But to put it into law now, and of course, how will we do that? What that would mean is that we would need to specify, specify a completely new law. Parts of the minimum standards law would have to be amended, if not repealed. And then that would have to be dovetailed in with the work that the Housing Minister has announced on the residential tenancy law, where we know there were lots of improvements needed, and combine them. And then we'd have to need a new element in about how we were going to legislate on energy efficiency when we haven't yet agreed the standards on the mandatory standards. We haven't agreed those in the Island Plan policies yet, or the building regulations, knowing that we need to work with industry to arrive at those. So I suspect some members will think, well, I'm just making complications. What I'm trying to do is to explain what we would then need to do. Because the scheme is obviously, well, the intention here is obviously well-meaning, and it's superficially attractive. But ask members, look, check it out. If you have, please don't read the comments, please read them. I'm a little bit disappointed. I did arrange, because knowing that I wouldn't do a very good job of explaining these complications, arrange for our environmental health officers to meet with Senator Moore to explain that in detail. Those meetings have happened twice. I'm disappointed that somehow or other, from Senator's comments just now, somehow or other, those comments don't seem to have, I don't know, been fully appreciated. They're sincere, because we do need to follow through. And what my preference would have been, but I took the view that I've failed twice to bring forward the regulations. They were the simplest possible. They were unbureaucratic. They were reasonably easy to deal with. I believe they weren't. They did, they did not. They should not have caused the reaction that they did, the negative reaction. And I think the landlord's views about them was overplayed. But the landlord's views about this proposal at the moment are most certainly not overplayed. And of course, members will have seen that note that's been sent round. Of course, you know, the what I'm told, if we were to have the amended version, because it goes further. You see, the original proposition says that there would be a risk rating approach for renewals. So in other words, you do the registration and then you have risk rating for renewals. That was the original proposition. When you go to the amendments, the amendment now says that it needs to, that the property cannot be rented out, cannot actually be rented. So that the officers have read this, and I think this is probably a fair understanding. It says they need to be accredited under the scheme. This is the amendment, which is now built in, accredited under the scheme in order to rent out property. So that would prevent anybody renting a property. And of course, what do we know about the numbers? Now, we all know that that number, the exact number of rental dwellings rented, is unknown, the exact number. But there are plenty of estimates. Now, the estimates that I have been relying upon throughout this whole process is 10 to 12,000. 10 to 12,000. I think the landlord put a higher number in it. I'm just trying to find the note here that I saw, but nonetheless, we think it's about 10 to 12,000. And at the moment, well, if we had to do all those inspections before we could rent these properties out, then the resource implications, frankly, are absolutely off the scale to do that. And those are stated in the comments that I issued on the amendments, and they've done a calculation there. You know, this is not my calculation. This is what my professional team are telling me, based on the reading of the proposition and the amendment. And just on the assumption we would need to do this in the first year to inspect all the properties, and the time required to go through not just the minimum standards, but all the extra things I spoke about, check the lease, go through all the details of the lease as far as the tenancy law, do the energy conservation side. I don't know what that would mean, meaning measuring the energy loss of the building and such and such and such, would be several hours. And that runs into, you know, just, you'll be shocked. I know I was shocked when I saw it, 20 staff extra. Now, I know Senator Moore says this is rubbish. And because, you know, in Senator Moore's report in the main proposition, the Senator Moore refers to an FOI request of June 21, saying that all this talk of extra costs of doing this job are overstated, because the cost in the FOI was 473,800. Well, I've looked at that and I've looked at, and frankly, I think I didn't, you know, we know how the scheme does. The minister doesn't issue FOI reports. They are issued by the officers, but the statement that I've looked at here, or the FOI report, those figures are not correct. They were the estimate of the actual cost of the staff in post who are doing the 6 staff with all the extra costs and overheads of doing the work that they're already doing on regulation, and that includes the rent safe for the 2,000 dwellings.
Minister, would you give way for a point of clarification from Deputy Tadier?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Deputy.
Thank you, sir. I had a question. The minister said he wouldn't have the bandwidth in his department to register everybody and to do the inspections, but could he explain what would happen at the moment if everybody who is a landlord currently registered with the Rent Safe scheme? What would happen in that case?
Are you able to clarify that, Minister?
Well, I think the practicality, sir, I think the answer is that we probably have to modify the Rent Safe scheme if that was the case. If suddenly I was faced with 8,000 people who wanted to go into the landlord scheme, what I asked to do with the proposals that I didn't get through the states, sir, was to work within the resources that we have, and to, on a 5-year basis, do a risk-based inspection over a period of 5 years. But of course, if on the basis that if all of the I was required to do all the rent safe people, I think I would have to say we could not cope with that now. It would be, I think that's most unlikely to happen, because I'm not sure, I don't know how long the rent safe scheme has been running, but a good number of years. And we don't know yet where the extra properties are, and that was the point of why I sought to bring in the register and the licensing. But on the register side, so I think the answer lies with the work that the housing minister has specified and drawn up, and he's going to speak about in a minute, which I absolutely agree with him. And that, I think, will dovetail with the minimum standards law that we got, sir, and I think will allow us to forward. So a complicated answer, but the answer is what would happen. It couldn't be achieved, sir. Not to the standard of the current rentscape scheme, because it's too comprehensive. It was the way it was told to me is that why RentSafe was introduced. It was introduced parallel on the food safe scheme, where moving from no regulation to full regulation, it was thought we would commence with a voluntary scheme to get the principle accepted. That worked well, but of course it didn't deal with the whole, and that is the work that the team have been trying to extend, and I've unsuccessfully brought forward, and which I think now Senator Moore's proposal, as amended by Deputy Ward, now proposes that we now adopt that scheme as a compulsory, which in my view simple, makes it law. I'd be happy to seek amendment from the Attorney General. It seems to me that if you say do new legislation, that's what it means, what it says. You want a new law. If you say you're going to want something mandatory, it means it's compulsory. And that brings the whole paraphernalia of what you put in the law, what the penalties are, etc., 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 which frankly is going over old ground. So, sir, I think I'll ask if I see whether I've dealt with Deputy Todier's question, and probably I'm getting to the end of my speech and should allow the Housing Minister to speak, sir.
So, is that the conclusion to your speech, then, Minister?
I think so. Yes, I'm going to stop at that point. So, if Deputy Todier is content with what I've said.
Well, he may not be content, but it is the point of clarification.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, I'm going to pause at that point. I don't get another chance to come back, I don't think. So I think, let me just look. I just want to make sure there's any other points I should pick up, because I'm not having a chance to come back again. And I'm told that the re-inspection would be over 5 years even at that rate would require major increases in resources, sir. So apologies for a sleep pause. So I think the housing minister, I think, will talk about the tenancy, the residential tenancy law part, about the rentscape scheme and the issues that would arise there. And just to say, what I would worry about here is if we do adopt a scheme which is over bureaucratic, involve very, very high costs, then the risks are, of course, we will turn off existing landlords, we will deter new landlords, and I would be very keen not to do that. And so that's why every proposal that I've brought to the Assembly before to achieve minimum standards is based on the least intervention and the least bureaucracy necessary. But these schemes now, what we're now discussing, is much more intrusive, much more likely to adversely affect, I believe, the availability of rental properties. And so I think, sir, I would advise the states not to go this way, but to come back again and implement the law we've already got. And the ideas that the housing register, which I agree with, which I believe can be progressed and lead to a much quicker result for the public. Thank you, sir. That's it.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Deputy Labby.
Sir, landlords seeking rent-safe accreditation are following best practice. It is a signal to prospective tenants, if they have the rent-safe accreditation, that the landlord will be issuing a good tenancy agreement, that the landlord's property is safe, and that the landlord's property is energy efficient, depending on the star rating. But three to 5 stars, any of the 3 to 5 star ratings, that is good. That is best practice. That's what we want to see encouraged, and perhaps we could do more to get more landlords to sign up to the scheme. But it is a sign, it is a badge of honour that a landlord has done this of their own volition, because it is a voluntary scheme. Once you make it mandatory, all of that goes. Now, I too, when I saw the proposition pop up in my inbox, wondered if Senator Moore was onto an interesting good thing here. But the fantastic environmental health team, who really know their stuff in this area, were absolutely horrified. And as explained to me, this will not do what we want a landlord's register to do. So I was vexed. I mean, I have signalled to the Assembly almost from the word go, or when I discovered it about 4 or 5 weeks into my term of office as minister. I have signalled to the Assembly consistently that I wanted to redraft the residential tenancy law, that it was full of anomalies, it is outdated, and we have to do much better. And the team, environmental health team, have been working on preparation of papers. We've been looking at what we want the new residential tenancy law to do in terms of rights for tenants, but responsibilities of tenants also, rights for landlords, and the responsibilities of landlords also. So come the end of the year, I was vexed that we hadn't made progress on a landlord registry, because it would be such an important and useful tool to my new housing strategy and regeneration team, and it is important for regulatory reasons too. So I said to the environmental health team, why don't we build the landlord registry into the new residential tenancy law? And they said, no, that's not going to work. I just don't think that'll work, Russell. So a week later, I had a message, and they changed their mind, and they said, Minister, we think this is actually, this could work. Because we could build the landlord registry into the new residential tenancy law, which is a regulatory piece of legislation. And we think that it actually could do what we want it to do and serve the right purpose. We need to go to Deputy Young, the Planning Environment Minister, to see if he doesn't mind us taking it from him and putting it into this law. And the Environment Minister was very positive about it. And so we have built it in to the instructions that I've just signed an MD to be sent to for law drafting. And it is incredibly complex. That process will take time. I have signalled to the Assembly as soon as I got the green light from the Planning Minister that we were hoping to put the landlord registry into the residential tenancy law. And I've signalled that to landlords, and I've had meetings with the Landlords Association, and I get regular contact with landlords individually, and I try to basically what I picked up when I took the job is that landlords felt there was a feeling, a perception that government was waging war on landlords, which would be a futile thing to do, and the collateral damage of any such war would be most felt by tenants. So I've wanted to try to build a better relationship with the landlords that speak to me individually, and with the Jersey Landlords Association. And so I did signal to them that this we were going to put the residential, the landlords registry of landlords into the residential tenancy law. I've had a meeting with them for an hour last week, and it was really positive. And I feel that I have begun to repair or build a better relationship with the landlords on the island. I hope they feel the same way too. I think they do, and I think we're developing trust. Once the law drafting of the residential tenancy law is has been completed, first draft, we will publish it and go out to proper, full, meaningful consultation. Excuse me. Due process. And that has got to be done in this sort of circumstance, because we want to know from both sides, all sides, that our new law is loophole proof, that what we're hoping for, and I think we're going to do it, is we're going to find that this new law will benefit. There will be benefits for tenants in it, and there will be benefits for landlords in it. It's going to be altogether better. And after that process, we will do the consultation, and then of course we'll do the draft, second draft, law drafting, and it will go to the Assembly. And yes, that will take time. I don't know that it will take any longer than actually the nightmare that this proposition represents in terms of getting it into law and so on and so forth. But time is important in this sort of scenario. In fact, the JLA are often saying to me, we need time. If we can see regulations coming down the line, we need time to make sure that we can be ready for their implementation, that our properties are ready. And they also deserve the right to be consulted properly and in a meaningful way. And that's what I have promised will happen, and I'm going to stick to that. So I believe this would be an administrative nightmare. It would require an incredible amount of extra staff. The re-registering every year or what have you would also be very, very difficult and very staff heavy. The beauty of the Landlords Register will be that the information for it will be inputted, will be uploaded by each landlord online, hopefully in a portal, and we will have all that data and that information. We know, history tells us that we have difficulty with from a digital modernization point of view, we have difficulty sucking out data from that was intended for one thing and using that for another. That's why we wanted the digital electoral roll to work for this election coming. But using all the, so effectively the idea was, if you've got a social security card and you've done the right time, you're on the electoral roll electronically, digitally. We'll just take that information, we'll suck it from there, we'll put it in there, and we'll use it for that. That proved impossible. We haven't been able to do it. And I worry about the same problem with taking one system, the RentSafe system, and trying to use it for another purpose. So this actually will probably be simpler and quicker, and I just want, as I say, I want to continue on this course. I think we're onto something with a much better residential tenancy law. I think the landlord register fitting inside it with cross regulation will do the trick and is cleaner and better. So in that respect, I think the landlords feel that this is licensing by the back door. I don't think it's right to do this to them. I think it's better that we follow appropriate due process. And so, as well-meaning and as well-intentioned as this is, I urge members to reject it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Minister, does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Senator for accepting the amendment. I'll explain my thinking behind that as we go. But I have to say, sir, that here we are again. It's a sort of Groundhog Day for us to look for some form of greater protection for those renting on this island and paying such high prices. Obviously, I feel that we missed the real opportunity to make constructive progress when the landlord licensing scheme was rejected after the principles were accepted. And we must remember that the principles of that were accepted in this assembly. And then we came back for the regulations, and after lobbying, direct lobbying within Council of Ministers, they were rejected. We must remember that. But we arrive at a position where a scheme is suggested that would be at the least enable us to ensure that the standard of homes for rent will reach those of a certain standard set by the states and the rental dwellings law. And there's something I must say to the housing minister. He said that rent safe means a good standard. Actually, level 3 of rent safe is the minimum standard. The minimum standard. And that's a really important distinction. So we are not saying that what's happening here is that we're going to suddenly produce a raft of palatial homes. We're going to reach a minimum standard for people renting on this island. This is Jersey, by the way. This is Jersey, a very developed economy, a wealthy island. And we're talking about minimum standards of living accommodation for people on this island. So, to be clear, what the amendment does, the amendment clarifies the requirement for accreditation or reaching minimum 3-star standard. To be clear, this does 2 important things. Without this, we would be formalising inadequate or perhaps even dangerous standards of accommodation. Just being on a rent safe in some way below level 3 would not be adequate. This is both contrary to the standards set out in the rental dwellings law and morally wrong for us as an assembly that seeks to protect our population as the very first action that we take. And that is a vital point about our role in this assembly. We must not forget our representative role. Second, it means that we are setting a very clear standard for homes on the island. We must recognise the very significant levels of rent that are being paid, to often 30, 40, 50%, and perhaps even more of people's incomes just on where they are living. And remember that Social Security pays £10 million to private rented dwellings without any guarantee that they reach minimum standards. The same amount, by the way, ironically, I don't know if it is irony, that is returned to the government from Andium Homes. So that's circulation of money from Andium Homes into the private rental sector with no actual regulation of those standards. Now, for those who are thinking economically in this assembly, is that really a good way to spend money? I don't think it is. And there's a contradiction there. And so again, we've been lobbied by the landlords associations, and it's the same arguments around cost, the effect of raising standard for landlords, and perceived negative impacts of landlords have been sent to us. So I must point out there are around 6,000 landlords in Jersey. The Landlords Association represents around 150, I believe, and I know some of them in the Landlords Association do not oppose this, and they actually supported the previous licensing scheme. And so we're not getting a true representation of landlords from this representation. And we talk about representation. Nobody, not a single person yet, and I don't think anyone will from government who would oppose this, has talked about those who are renting. How about the tenants? Have they been consulted? Their position, where they are in this system? The answer is no. And the housing minister seemed to be not interested in tenants' views. Hasn't had an hour's meeting with tenants, had an hour's meeting with landlords to see whether they can fit into a register. And I must point out, so that a register is a completely different thing. A list of who a landlord is different from rental standards. And you know, you can have your list. It would be a good idea to have a list, but that seems way beyond where we are. So let's look at the proposition itself. The point of the proposition is to bring forward such a legislative amendments, it says from the minister. The comments paper he produces outlines the challenges of implementing, but he can control the implementation as minister. That's what this has given him the power to do. What he could have done, and what he's failed to do yet again, as we've failed to actually pass the regulations, he could have done a number of things. One, the scheme where new builds need to have lesser inspection, as they would have reached recent building standards. These are just ideas. These are things that could have been worked with, but they haven't even been approached in the comments paper. Solutions to making this work have not been put in the comments paper, just outright opposition. Blocks of modern flats built to the same specification can require one inspection, cutting the numbers required significantly. That makes sense. That's an efficient, appropriate, proportionate way to deal with this situation. A grandfathering scheme using initial self-assessment could have been developed to enable time and support for improvements. And then public health have information on where poor housing is. And we're about to go and knock on every single door in districts that you will see where the poor accommodation is. You will knock on doors. Well, I will. I don't know about some others, where people are cooking their dinner from their bed, you know, and that's the reality of living in this island. That was what that type of thing, that suggestion from the minister would have done, would give an improvement over time, but still maintain that standards are necessary in a modern society. And so what this means is that the comments paper is simply inaccurate and very worst case scenario without any intelligent and creative approaches to enabling this proposition. How can we get this done if it's the right thing to do? And I remind this assembly, it agreed the principles of a licensing system before. The principles were there. But so rather than producing comments that are looking to solve perceived problems, I have to say that the minister has kowtowed to the lobbying groups and the political representatives at the heart of government. And so I mention that not simply to be confrontational, but to point out that that is a real issue here. It's come back again and again and again. And when the public look onto this debate and what's going to happen today, if this is not passed again, they will come to the same conclusion. That there is a disproportionate amount of power of those interests in this system against those who are spending so much money to find a home, somewhere to live. And there's even this suggestion there from the report that there will be an exodus of landlords from the market. There is simply no evidence for this. And indeed, sir, written question 2, 2022 from Senator Mezek shows that from 2012, we have seen an increase of 2,000 in the number of landlords declaring rental income at a time of the introduction of rental dwelling standards. So the two things, that evidence is not there, and that argument is simply flawed. And so the comments are misdirected and simply raise the issue that could be addressed by the minister giving the political will to do something. And there is not a political will from the minister or this government to introduce any of the much needed regulations into our rental landscape. And we've seen that from the housing minister today. I don't know what the plan was called. I've lost track of what all the plans are being called. Another one with lovely titles that's probably got a particular committee within the government to come up with the titles of it. I mean, I'm sure that is the case. More money being spent with no outcome. But anyway, so part B of the proposition allows for a scheme to be developed for ongoing renewal of the accreditation with a risk rating approach. This can be developed in a manageable way. And consider this, if our housing stock is in such bad repair that is not even manageable, then we have a crisis way beyond just availability. And why on earth has this not been dealt with years ago? The argument seems to be, well, we've got so many problems. If we introduce something, the problems will come out and we won't be able to do anything about it. So we are formalising poor accommodation with that attitude. We're all lucky to have somewhere decent to live. But there are many, 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 many people on this island of all income brackets, not just the lowest incomes, who do not. And we have to address this in this assembly. And yet again, we're not going to do that if we're not careful. But so I've got to say, this is not the real proposition I wanted to see passed. I believe the licensing scheme would have been the best way forward. But this is the last chance to move anything forward in terms of protection for tenants, raising housing standards and having some formal record of landlords who they are in this assembly before we break. And none of us should assume we're going to be re-elected. So this is our last opportunity to make that difference now. And I hope and I encourage members not to fall for the same old arguments, not to fall for the same old issues that, as I've shown and I've explained, are not actually valid. And it's our final chance to make the change where previous failures have failed to make the necessary change with the licensing law, and previous failures to reassure tenants on this island actually, for the vast amount of money that they're paying and the vast amount of taxpayers' money that's being used, we as an assembly will say there will be a minimum standard, everyone living in a home on this island. So, sir, I urge members to take this opportunity to make this change today, not shirk our responsibility to protect the population of this island, and let's move forward and let's support the proposition as amended. Thank you, sir.
Firstly, will you give way to a point of clarification from the Connotables from John?
Of course, sir.
Thank you, sir. So if I heard right, the deputy stated that the Council of Ministers have been lobbied from within. Can he clarify what he means by that, please?
Yes, sir. The Council of Ministers, the Assistant Chief Minister, is the political consultant for the Landlords Association.
Sir, can I raise standing order issue, please?
Yes, you can. What?
In his speech, Deputy Ward made an allegation of my kowtowing
Sir, I will apologise.
In my imposition, sir.
Yes.
And I wonder whether that's allowed under standing orders, because my motivation is to use resources properly and most effective way of achieving the state's objective, and my opposition is based on that judgment, sir.
Well, that's a point fairly made. Deputy Ward has just indicated he's perfectly content to withdraw that and apologise for it.
So I'm very passionate on this subject. I withdraw the comment if I didn't mean to offend the minister, because I think I want a level of debate that is beyond that. So I do apologise, and I withdraw the comment. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to the deputy.
Thank you, Deputy Tadier.
Thank you, sir. I better watch what I say as well in that case. It seems, although I don't think we're anywhere near robust debate here, people might have particular sensitivities. What I would say is that I've always considered the Environment Minister to be, by and large, a fellow traveller, and I think in the past we've been aligned when it's come to a desire to properly regulate housing in Jersey. I think we both know that there are some terrible properties that get rented out, and that there's very much an asymmetrical relationship between tenant and landlord at the best of times. And what I find frustrating here is that this is now probably this seems to be the fourth iteration we've had in short succession. And I know the minister's had a go, of course, at bringing in his own form of regulation. And we have a scheme here which already exists. It's been up and running, and it is lauded by the department. It's lauded by the Environment Department as being successful, and they encourage landlords to join it and to sign up. And the point I made earlier in asking my question, sir, is that if everybody who is a landlord now turned around and contacted the department and said we want to register with RentSafe, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? That would be something which presumably the Environment Minister wants. It's something that the Housing Minister should also want. It's something which they should be taking ads out for in the media, as they have been doing with their other propaganda. I know the two Housing Minister and Environment Minister aren't members of the government party, but if the government party can afford to take out propaganda videos saying how well they're doing, they could afford to take out videos and adverts telling the public and the landlords that this scheme is available. And they could say that if you sign up early, then you get your foot in the door, and that there's an advantage for you potentially as an accredited landlord to distinguish yourselves from other non-accredited landlords. And this idea that it just seems to me that the Environment Minister is protesting too much here. He's saying that what if I have to turn this around in a year? How am I going to possibly get around every property to inspect it and accredit it? Well, let's break that down. First of all, nobody is saying that there is a time frame in which this should be done. The proposition, even as amended, doesn't give a time frame. It just says to bring forward such legislative amendments as are necessary to make it legally mandatory that all landlords register with the current scheme and achieve an accredited status. So it's up to the Environment Minister, because it's the request is to him to do this, to choose about how he wants to do that, what timescale, what provisions he wants to put in place to get that done, what grandfathering provisions he may wish to instigate for that scheme. So that argument doesn't stack up. It's not a case of him having to do this within the next year. It's something that could be rolled out on a basis. And it could be that it starts off with the landlords or the properties which we know are problematic first. They're the ones that are registered. I think of the comparison with what's happening at the moment with vehicles. So I used to have a 50cc not too long ago, and I used that to get around the island. It's very efficient. I replaced it, upgraded to a 125. And when I bought that, not long after, I had to go in to get it checked with DVS. It was a pretty straightforward process. They told me that it was OK to drive, and they flagged up some potential issues in the future that I might want to keep an eye on. I paid for that, in fact, you know, and that scheme is there in place. You didn't hear motorists saying, "Oh, this is a terrible scheme. If you introduce that, you'll be taking all motorcycles, all mopeds off the road." And I understand that the plan is to roll out that to be tested on all vehicles at some point, but it's done on a priority basis. And I think that's what will be within the gift of the minister. He can come back to the Assembly and say, OK, the first year I'm going to concentrate on these properties, then in the next 6 months I will expand it to these properties. And in the next 3 years, for example, I know that all properties and all landlords will have to be registered. And of course, if the minister needs more resources, he simply has to ask for it. It brings me to the point is, look at what we've done during COVID, at the amount of resources we poured into that to keep people safe, yes, but also to keep the island running and to keep businesses functioning. That huge subsidy that's been put in at the harbour, at the airport, to get visitors into the island, to allow our locals to travel to and forth. But the other point is that we've got a housing pandemic here. It's a crisis, and we've got a pandemic of proportions that we don't really know about, but we know that they exist. We know that very expensive rents are out there. People are struggling to afford it, and they can't even be guaranteed that the properties they live in meet minimum standards, sir. And I do despair when I find this Assembly not being able to come to terms with even the lowest of the low schemes, the minimums, without any cost to the landlord, when in fact we know that landlords I think by and large, most landlords do want to do the right thing. I don't think the Landlord Association speaks for the majority of landlords. I know landlords myself who say to me, we're quite happy to be regulated. Just tell us what we want to do. We think we're doing it already. We're happy to be on the register. We're happy to be on the scheme, and we would even be happy to pay something towards it to make sure that we comply. We've rented in the past, and we want to make sure we do the right thing. So it seems that we can't win one way or the other. If we point to a scheme that doesn't yet exist, we're told, oh no, it's going to be too much bureaucracy. If we point to a scheme that does exist already and it works well, we're told, oh no, that's not fit for purpose. Well, we've never been told that the rent safe scheme isn't fit for purpose before. I think there are so many red herrings being put around here. I would ask the minister actually and say to him, if he wants to achieve something in this term, his last term of office, this is the last chance saloon for him to support something that is meaningfully going to give protection to tenants who are currently in a very vulnerable position. So he might be interested. I spoke to a former tenant of St Albans who was caught up in the fire there a year ago. Her housing issues are still ongoing. She's still dealing with the consequences of having rented a flat which a fire occurred in it, which wasn't her problem, wasn't her fault, but it became her problem. And she's been left out of pocket. She's been left stressed by it, and all because it's quite apparent that there were probably things in the flat that were going on that shouldn't have been going on, and that her safety and other people's safety were put at risk. And if we can stop that happening across the board, sir, and I do note that, interestingly enough, to achieve a third class rating, a third star rating, sorry, in the current scheme, it's very interestingly worded. It says that you need to meet the minimum standards. I'll read it. The property meets the minimum rent safe standard and has achieved accreditation through compliance with the minimum legal standards. So it seems to me that you need to have achieved the minimum legal standards to get a 3-star. So that presumably means if you have 0, 1 or 2, you don't even meet the legal minimum standards, which means you shouldn't be renting your flat out or your property out at all because it doesn't comply with the law. But it would be suggested by this wording that people are renting 0, 1 and 2 star properties out. These are people who have come forward for the scheme, remember. Imagine those who don't come forward for the scheme currently, who might not be complying with the law, and we don't know about them, who rely on tenants being reactive when there's a problem, tenants who may not speak out, who may not know their rights, when in fact we wouldn't tolerate this in any other industry, sir. I'll leave my comments there. I do hope that members, no matter what their status, whether they're landlords, tenants, actually remember who they're here to represent today and in the coming months. It's to make sure that everybody is treated right. And if we're not going to treat tenants as basic human beings, let's at least treat them as we would customers and give them good customer protection. But I believe it goes further than that. Every property is a home for somebody, and whether you're renting or living in your own home, you deserve to have a minimum standard of safety, and that's what we're here to ensure, sir.
Constable of St Lawrence.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd just like to speak briefly to this. I think the Environment Minister used the word enticing when he spoke earlier. I think he said that it seems like an enticing proposition. And that certainly was the way I felt when I read it. I'd just like to put a question to one of the assistant environment ministers, as the minister himself has already spoken, and his comments are very helpful, particularly with the table that he has produced, which shows that he estimates that this work would take 20 years to manage and to deliver on. And my question to one of his assistant ministers is this argument against the proposition based on cost to the department or potential difficulty in recruiting the additional extra officers that would be needed to undertake this task if we approve the proposition as amended today? And if the problem is in difficulty in recruitment, it seems to me that what we should as a government be doing is taking stock of the potential employees who have been employed by us to deliver the COVID vaccination scheme and who are potential employees for different aspects of government work. My understanding is that there is probably a pool of almost immediate employable people who could be used for a scheme such as this. So that's my point and my questions to the Assistant Environment Minister. Referring to Senator Moore, sir, or ma'am, I should say, oh, sir, you're there now.
Yes.
Sorry, I hadn't been looking at my screen. I would just ask Senator Moore, please, when she sums up, to respond to the final sentence in the Minister's comments when he says that unintended consequences for this proposition, if approved, could be an exodus of landlords from the market, increased risk of homelessness, and an increase of revenge evictions. So, sir, when I have heard comments to my questions, it will certainly help me decide which way I'm going to vote on this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Deputy Gita.
Sorry, first of all, I need to withdraw the conflict of interest. I just remember that actually I'm not a residential landlord anymore, but please, nobody should read anything into that. Very quickly, I think the problem here is that we're conflagrating many completely different things. So instead of talking about residential standards, I'd like to talk about food safety. So what we're doing here is saying, okay, there's a food safety law. It ensures that if you go to a restaurant, you won't get poisoned, that if you buy food in supermarket, you don't get poisoned. But we're not very happy about the way it is implemented. So what we'll do is that we'll make it compulsory to have at least 1 Michelin star before you can trade. So first thing, there's absolutely no relation, physical or legal, between getting a 1 Michelin star and actually the minimum the food safety law standards. One is about not killing you, and the other one is about the quality of service that you get, the quality of the food. So it is a little bit the same. We have a public health and safety rented dwellings Jersey Law 2018 and the public life and safety rented dwellings minimum standards and prescribed hazards Jersey Order 2018. I need to write them down because they're a little bit long to remember. Those things have existed since 2018. They exist. There are standards ensuring that there's a minimum level of safety if you rent a dwelling in Jersey. Those standards exist. Our real problem is that we'd like to be able to inspect those properly and strategically. And the last thing we want to do is to inspect them all. The last thing you want to do is, I mean, it's not just the amount of work, because we're talking about years and at least £1 million in expense. And that's the answer to the constable. It's intrusion. We're asking to enter and spend several hours in about 25 to 30% of the dwellings in the island. That's what this is about. And then to inspect them for standards that are not legal, that are like the Michelin standards, of a wide range of requirements that allows you to grade a dwelling against another. So they are not in law. So to do this properly and make it compulsory, first we will need to put all these standards in law. So that will probably take 8 months to a year, have it voted, a completely new Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Jersey Law 2023, and then one by one visit 30% of the dwellings in the island. So that's the requirement here. That's what this is about. And it is a shame because we are so close. We have the laws, we have the order, we have we have very strict regulations. 90% of the time we know that they are followed, that everything is safe. We just need to find statistically the few that don't comply. We tried a couple of times to have a licensing system, which would have worked because basically it would have given us a list of rented dwellings and a way to license or not license. We are very, very close to do that again without the licensing, but at least with getting the list. So with the list, we can make statistical visits, not spend millions and years of time, but do statistical visits and check statistically that the dwellings respect the law. We do that for almost everything else. When you're on the road, how many times, sir, have you been stopped on the road? That's how we check vehicles. That's how we check that you have your papers, that you're not drunk, and that your vehicle is roadworthy. We don't stop absolutely everybody. Once a year, we make a big barrage in front of Saint-Hélier, and absolutely everybody goes through that and gets an instant MOT. We'll do that, but it also gives them several years. So again, there's this configuration. Oh, this looks so nice. There's the stars that you can get, and this, it would be so nice to just extend it to everybody. We need to write a law for this. We need to write a law saying we will now adopt the standards from the rent safe scheme. We will make them compulsory, and then we will make a visit compulsory. This is unbelievably heavy, and that's why this proposition is a problem. It looks at something, says, oh, that's such a simple solution, and actually the solution is about 10 times heavier than the licensing schemes that we've refused not 2 but 3 times. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. And, can I ask, please, point of clarification from the previous speaker, because I wish I would speak earlier so I could ask something that he addressed in his last sentence, if he can clarify.
Are you prepared to give way, Deputy?
Of course, sir.
Yes, you can.
Would the Assistant Minister advise the difference he see that the rent safe scheme is heavier compared to the licenses? Because he said it's rent safe scheme is worse than the licenses one.
Yes, the rent safe scheme is a grading system that goes far beyond the minimum standards. So if you've got 5 stars in your 5 stars in your rent safe scheme, you are absolutely at the top. And things that are not compulsory, so for example, energy efficiency, will be part of that.
Okay, thank you. So I will continue with my speech, sir.
Yes, please do.
And thank you for the Assistant Minister for clarification, because when I'm thinking about the rent safe scheme, I'm thinking about residential standards, which is 3-star. And this is the minimum standards that anyone needs to achieve. We do have residential standards. We adopted the principles. And I would like to bring members' attention, if anybody remember, it's happened in 2020, the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel published report in 2020 before our debate. And we as a panel has queried the necessity for both the rent safe scheme and the licenses, because it feels like the one scheme in place will be less bureaucratic. When we looked, we realized that the rent safe scheme is simple, is possible, and independent, not impose licensing. In my head, license you can give and you can take away. It's a license to operate. In the UK, during our scrutiny review, we found that there are 27 accreditation schemes, and the Rent Safe scheme is one of these similar 27 accreditation schemes. As a panel, we made recommendation, and recommendation number 1 in our scrutiny review was the Minister for the Environment should explore possibility of combining the Rent Safe scheme and the proposed licensing scheme. We didn't really get a detailed answer why it's not possible, because actually common sense, we have Rent Safe scheme in place. You don't have to reach 5-star. You can do 3-star. Several landlords, including myself today, declared that we registered our property on Rent Safe scheme. So for us, it doesn't make really difference because we did it. We did the process. We met the standards. And why to create another scheme? Why to create another bureaucratic options to make licenses? If we have this already, what's important, I think, for all of us, it's to ensure that people live in decent accommodation standards, accommodations with decent standards. Now, preparing for licenses, I remember the department presented that their recruitment strategy, because with the licenses, you also need to go and inspect the property. You cannot give the license without inspection. And we knew that it will take 3-4 years. We knew that it will take longer. I think it's a minister gift, if this proposition will be adopted, to create a scheme, how long it will take, and it will take time, and what property need to be inspected first and what later on. Another assumption was made, it's about newly built properties. Unfortunately, during the last couple of months, me and Deputy Hagarat, we dealt with 2 cases in our district with newly built properties when the buyers didn't inspect. They basically, it's newly built, just on the market, and they're facing serious problems. They are not landlord, they bought it, whatever, but there are problems with also newly built, and maybe it's less, maybe it needs to be inspected later at some point, maybe after some years. So if I'm trying to, what I'm trying to say, it's very difficult for me to understand why the license is lighter than the accreditation. In my head, it's not. We've been prepared to do inspection, and we want to make sure that safe minimum standards met. And it is in minister's gift. If you're looking through the proposition, the minister can decide when it's happening, how it's happening, and so on. And it's possible to bring to the assembly. I just echo some words that it can be creatively implemented, and we don't need to introduce new schemes when we have something simple and working already in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Deputy Senator Valois.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think it's important that I'm open and transparent with the Assembly. When I first saw this proposition lodged, my initial reaction was, oh, here we go again. And the reason why I say that is because I've lost count the amount of times we've had these debates around the importance of having minimum standards for renting property in the island. Renting property in other jurisdictions, the legislation came in for minimum standards in the 1970s, UK as an example, or England and Wales as an example. It bothers me, sir, this proposition, and the reason why I say that is not because I don't necessarily not agree with it, and I know that sounds odd, but so from my point of view, there was a proposition, an amendment to the government plan, which I brought actually with regards to the resources for the IHE department, with regards to requirements around extra resources. think that injected an extra 1.7 million into the department. There was also an additional, I think it was around about £1 million that was put in place because of the reduction in the department's budget previously with regards to the expectation of income for the licensing scheme that was expected. So, sir, I do question the arguments around resourcing and the requirements. However, I do get the argument around the expectations of particular schemes that are being brought in. And I have to reference here, this is no reflection on the proposer at all, but sometimes I think this is a too little too late. And the reason why I say that is because I was fully behind the licensing scheme. I was fully behind the rented dwellings law when it came in last term. And actually, I was on the scrutiny panel that scrutinised that legislation at the time. I believe that from my point of view is if I support this as a member of the Assembly, it's asking for a minister to go away and bring legislation forward. And from my experience last time, and bearing in mind we've got an election in between, so we won't see that legislation until the next Assembly, and I won't be here for that. But what's to say that it won't happen again? What's to say that actually if we agree the rent safe scheme that Senator Moore is proposing here, as this Assembly, that when the legislation is brought forward by the future Minister for Environment around minimum standards, and I welcome the news of the changes to the residential tenancy law by the Housing Minister, but for me, I've lost a great deal of trust in the government when it comes to Assembly decisions and the ability to follow through with the expectations of Assembly decisions. And so this one in particular, now it's the fourth time we're debating this. I'm not sure whether any vote today, whether it's for or against, will actually have any influence on legislative changes going forward. And so I'm stuck in a quandary as to whether I do or do not support this. I would prefer that the legislation that was brought forward by the Minister for Environment after we had the in principle debate by Deputy Ward's proposition previously, if that had been approved. But that was not the case, and we are where we are. So, sir, I'm not sure what I should do. And I'd like Senator Moore to try and convince me as to why my vote for this may actually achieve any form of results going forward, because at this point in time, I'm not convinced that will be the case. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak on the proposition?
Yes, sir.
Chief Minister.
I'm sorry, sir. Apologies for the delay. Sir, assuming you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
I think just to make sure that I've got the amendment, what we're debating correct, sir, is obviously to bring forward such legislative amendments as are necessary to make it legally mandatory that all landlords register with the current rent safe schemes. That's all landlords. And obviously with Deputy Ward's amendment, which has been accepted and are accredited under the scheme in order to rent out property. So in other words, sir, and that seemed to be clear from the report of Deputy Ward, and therefore, and is what's in the proposition, because the proposition is being proposed as amended, is that if you are not accredited under the rent safe scheme, you therefore cannot let out to tenants. And there's obviously some argument whether it's 10,000 landlords, 10,000 properties or 20,000 properties, but whatever the number is, it is a significant number. What I was going to say, sir, is twofold. Number one, sir, let's be very clear, certainly in the dealings I've had as Chief Minister in this area, is that the officials themselves, and I'll come on to the ministers in a sec, are absolutely passionate about trying to resolve this problem. And it is those officials who are absolutely saying this is not a way to resolve the issue that we're trying to deal with. we all agree, believe it or not, that we do want to make matters, improve matters, to deal with the quality and condition of rental accommodation. You know, I would hope we're in universal agreement on that front. But I would also hope, sir, that in fact I think Deputy Taddy has alluded to it in the more recent, in his last speech, that certainly the Minister for Environment and the Minister for Housing are absolutely, resolved to try and sort this out. Again, it is a matter that is very close to their hearts. I think certainly Deputy Russell has said, you know, he has been going to lots of he's doing a lot of work on this area, we know that, but also I think he's adopting the right approach of recognizing that there are a variety of parties that are involved in any changes in this area, and that they all do need to their various views do need to be taken into account, and that's called having a fair approach. But you know, let's be really clear. If they had come to council ministers and said, actually, this is the way forward, but they both came to the council. I think the council ministers would have had to have a different view, sir. But they have both come to the council and said, this does not work. In fact, sir, they've been about as clear to the Assembly as possible. They haven't used the word that this proposition, particularly as amended, could have the potential to be a complete disaster. And in essence, if it's 10,000 properties, according to this proposition, they will all have to be inspected before tenants are before landlords can let to a tenant. So goodness knows what happens to tenants who are already in there, and that is because even if the property meets the standard, if it's not been inspected to meet that standard, it won't therefore be accredited, as I understand it. And so, sir, there is also some anecdote at the moment, evidence that, if there's such a thing, that some landlords are already leaving the market. So there is a real concern that this could just significantly make matters worse in the rental market, which is obviously not the intention. Sorry, I would rather assume is not the intention, sir, of the proposer or the proposer of the amendment. So I think actually what Senator Valbar said about a little bit too little too late, but I would be slightly gentler, which is, yeah, I think it's well intended, sir, but it is going to lead, on the basis of the information that we've been given as the council ministers, to significant negative unintended consequences. And that's really the main message that both the Minister for Environment, and he's been absolutely passionate on the subject, and he's tried, I think, at least twice, and the Minister for Housing, and no one can doubt or challenge the energy he's been bringing into this area. For those two ministers to be saying, and they have not been lobbied internally by the council ministers, within the council ministers, etc. For those two ministers to come to that conclusion, I really do think, and really do ask members to sit up and take note. And certainly, sir, fairly obviously, I will not be supporting this proposition, but I really do suggest to members that, or ask members to follow suit and to reject this one. It runs real risk on the basis of what we've been informed, sir, of having serious negative consequences to the rental market, which is already facing challenges, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Minister. Deputy Samore.
Thank you, sir. And I've not spoken often in the many in previous debates we've had on residential tenancy arrangements, but I just wanted to speak briefly to point out the administrative nightmare that arises if this proposition was to be adopted. The scenario painted by the Environment Minister in his 2 comments papers just makes clear the risks that we run, the mess that we might create just by trying to latch on to this voluntary scheme and just by some magic turning it into into a mandatory scheme without consultation. And the Environment Minister certainly doesn't make those comments lightly. He will have considered this very carefully, because it's absolutely his wish, and he would have wanted to come up with a scheme, and he would have done this if this would have been possible and feasible for him to do. but we must take note, I believe, of the warnings he's given us in his comments to turn the rent safe scheme into a compulsory legislative scheme. It requires, and it's so complex that the legislation itself, and is unnecessary. Our Housing and Communities Minister has told us that he's taking forward the residential tenancy law and the extra provisions that he can put into that, which will involve consultation. And it's fair to consult on this. There has been, and there would be, no consultation on a mandatory rent safe scheme if we were to pass the present proposition. That is quite unfair. And why would we run two huge pieces of legislation in tandem that cover this area? The Housing Minister tells us he's making these changes to the residential tenancy law, and he's moving forward with that. He's issued drafting instructions. So let's take that forward and not come into this scenario where the IAG department needs to suddenly find, well, at least 20 extra staff, train them, and they have to visit every rented premise in the island and then re-inspect on occasions. As I've said, the administrative nightmare that creates. Far better to target their inspections because I believe the department well knows the premises that they need to inspect and target those and act to protect the tenants that need the protection, the most protection that we can give. So, sir, I really hope we don't go down and descend into this scenario of this complexity quite unnecessarily. And I urge members to reject the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Deputy Sir Peter.
Thank you, sir. I haven't spoken on this subject in the last couple of debates. I've kept a low profile. Watched the Assembly form their own opinions, and I'm not going to go into detail, but I just want to bring up a couple of points that I think are relevant, that observations that need to be made. I'm on the rent safe scheme. I think it's an exceptionally good scheme. I find the service I got when I invited someone to come along and inspect the properties was good. They looked through my electricity reports, the leases, they checked my deposits, and I came away with, unlike this morning's exam results from Deputy Higgins when I got an F, I came away with 5 stars. And I'm very happy to do that. And I recently contacted the department to update any changes that have been made to my properties. And that was reflected, and that is a very good service. It was quite laborious for the officer inspecting it. It wasn't trivial, but it was thorough and it was good. Now, what worries me is we've heard, this is not me, we have heard that to inspect 10,000 properties, an unknown number, but an estimate of 10,000 properties, will require 20 additional staff. Now, that's great. We can look at the money that 20 additional staff are going to cost, but let's forget about that. We spent all morning debating a population policy, and the majority of the people who are complaining about the population policy were also wanting to have numbers, restrictions and controls. Yet miraculously this afternoon, we're going to conjure up 20 members of staff when we have got, I reckon, a greater staffing crisis than a housing crisis. But if you go and talk to the businesses over there and their desperate urge to recruit and train and have stability in their workforces, it's not the money, it's just the staff. Now, I'm going to have to also, what really concerns me is Deputy Labby is doing a great job bringing work together, strategic piece of work to bring everything together. And what's happened over the last 4 years is the lack of stability, the uncertainty that's been created because of these many different propositions that have come forward that haven't been closed. So why would we want to do this when the train is in motion for an excellent piece of work to change residential tenancy and have a register at the same time. I find that extraordinary. However, what I do want to talk about is the matter of landlords exiting the market. And I noticed as soon as I pushed my button to speak, Senator Mezek was going to come in hot pursuit, obviously, because he would want to try and trump what I was going to say. The Freedom of Information that came out recently saying that there's something like 7,000 landlords, which 740 of them are non-resident. I took the time out to delve deep into that and ask a few more probing questions, which are actually quite revealing. What was interesting is that on 2017 to 2018, the law changed whereby local taxpayers had to declare property income sourced from outside of Jersey. So that meant that accounted for an extra 1,000 resident landlords and 80 non-resident landlords. So 1,000 resident landlords means if you have a holiday home that you let out for a couple of weeks in the year to help pay the costs, that is property income that needs to be declared in your local tax return, as an example. The other thing that it also from 2018 to 2019, coincidentally, the numbers of landlords dropped immediately after the legislation, 40 residents and 10 not residents. Not a lot, but it's a trend. The other thing we don't look into is we have a large number of people in Jersey who rent out their homes because they're working overseas for a period of time. They need to declare that income. They're in the UK, but they have to declare their Jersey income back to Jersey, and vice versa. We have many people coming over working here in government who rent their homes out in the UK and then come over here and rent here, but they still have to declare their tax income from the properties they're renting in the UK. So all I'm suggesting to you is there's a lot more to the detail behind it when probed. And the reality of it is it goes back to the need to have accurate data, which I'll be fully supporting Deputy Labby with if we're still around when that comes to the Assembly. And don't forget, I did bring P82 2020, additional landlord and tenant register, to the Assembly, which was approved by many, many people, if I remember correctly. I think what this really means, I contacted some local estate agents and they did a survey. And they went out, a small survey, okay, I accept it's a small sample, 5 or 6 agents came back, and over an 18-month period of 2020 and 21. And they told me that 46% of transactions that they made in that period of time were landlords exiting the market. They also told me that 6% of transactions they took were landlords coming into the market. However, they did freely admit that there was one agent, and I don't know who it is, but I hope I'm not alluding to it, is that does specialize in new build property, and they sold a lot of buy-to-let properties. So I can see a trend there. I can see a trend of people moving out because of the cost of maintaining properties and buying new builds because it's far easier to look after, to go through the regulations. And that's a sensible business thing to do if you wish to do so. But my biggest concern with this uncertainty is we are supposed to be looking after tenants here. And this constant runaround of whether your landlord is selling, the tenant is constantly thinking, is it going to be me next? We see the high profile ones in the paper. Is it going to be me next? And anecdotally, like I said, I was sitting in an estate agent a couple of months ago, having a cup of coffee. And in 15 minutes, 2 people came off the street and said, I need to move within a month. My landlord is selling. Now, it's anecdotal and it's 15-minute snapshot in time. But if you put these together, there's a real trend. And we need to understand that trend before we can go forward and make any more, shall I say, scare the horses legislation. If landlords sell, somebody buys. And it's invariably not another landlord. It is purchased by a developer, because normally if they're selling, for sake of argument, it's a property, the standards aren't very high. It goes to a developer. That developer puts his building crew in, 3 months later, puts it on the market, makes a huge profit. That's the reality, the flow of the dollar, which is not helping anybody. And I will leave it there. So clearly, I don't think I have to remind the Assembly, but I will not be supporting this.
Senator Mezek.
Thank you, sir. And I will make the point, I guess, at the very start, that I agree with some of what has been said about said by previous speakers about the situation we're in not being ideal. And I agree with that. The situation is not ideal. In 2018, when the rented dwellings minimum standards of health and safety regulation came in, so for the first time having enshrined properly in Jersey law that there should be minimum standards in housing which is rented out in Jersey so that it is safe to live in and so that it is healthy to live in. This is about minimum standards, not luxury or anything like that. That at some point there would need to be a mechanism for ensuring that those standards were actually applied, that they were standards in reality and not simply standards in theory. The minimum standards were brought into law without that enforcement mechanism to have some time leading up to that for people to get used to those minimum standards being in place and for those who wanted to be ahead of the game to voluntarily try and catch up and get there. But it was the case, and you can read this in the reports that accompanied that law when it was first brought forward, that it would eventually lead to licensing. And the purpose of that licensing would be the same as the purpose of licensing in other areas that are regulated like this, like, for example, restaurants, where there are regular inspections, there is licensing, and if you don't meet the minimum standards, you can be shut down. That was the intention to get there with rental homes. So we're now in this term of office in our fourth attempt. And it's the fourth attempt both chronologically and in order of preference too. The best option was the option that the Environment Minister first brought. That wasn't acceptable to the Assembly, so he then brought forward an amended version based on further conversations and consultation, and that was rejected by the Assembly. And then a third version came from Deputy Ward, which was initially accepted, and then when the enabling regulations were brought forward was rejected. And now we're at the fourth attempt, which is to try a slightly different tactic and do it through the already existing RentSafe scheme. Look at the trend. Every time this subject is raised and rejected, what then ends up following is a watered down version. And we're now told by the Housing Minister that they're looking at a register to include in the residential tenancy law. A register, let's be clear, is nothing more than a data collection exercise. It is not the same as a licensing regime, which means that standards are enforced. It will still leave it down to luck whether we actually discover properties out there that are failing to meet these minimum standards, because the information that will be contained on that register will in most instances not be good enough to work out if the property it relates to falls below those legal minimum standards. And so on that basis, I would argue it's a waste of time, especially when there are regulations that exist that could be brought back again at some point soon to enact a licensing scheme that would enable us to enforce those minimum standards. So, sir, even though this proposition is not ideal, I will still support it because it's certainly better than what is proposed by the Housing Minister, which is merely data collection. I will say to the Housing Minister, and I do this I guess to give him notice, because there is an item on the order of paper later in this sitting to talk about residential tenancy matters. He's told us that he's lodged law drafting instructions for the residential tenancy law. He hasn't actually told us what those instructions are, and it would actually be nice to know, sir, because we're being told with a tangible proposition in front of us, in this proposition from Senator Moore, and a tangible proposition from myself later in the order paper, we're being told for both of those, no, don't do this. Trust me, I've got it all in hand. I've already issued some instructions on this. I think the respectful thing to do would be to tell states members actually what those instructions are, so that we can have confidence that they are the right instructions. So the lack of transparency on that is not particularly good. So we've only just really properly found out that these law drafting instructions apparently say that there'll be some sort of registering system in the new residential tenancy law. But again, that will just be data collection and not enforcement. This has been accused by the Deputy of St. Juan, who I note did support previous iterations of the licensing scheme. And I remember when I was minister at the time being grateful for him being one of the few allies on the Council of Ministers on that when it came to it. I was pleased with that. But he has now described this one as an administrative nightmare. He's spoken of the same issue that the Deputy of St. Peter has about there needing to be 20 extra staff to do these inspections. And that is not a given, actually. It is very clear in the proposition from Senator Moore that there will be a step after this, which means putting that legislation together to achieve it, where there will be an opportunity to find the smoothest way of implementing this. So there should be no assumption that it will be the most difficult version that automatically is accepted. When we go to drafting the legislation to implement this, there will be all sorts of things that we can do to mitigate that impact. Deputy Ward spoke of some of those in his speech about potentially having a grandfathering system. So those that we know are acceptable don't have to go through the full process. When there's a new block of accommodation, you don't need to inspect every property, because as long as one of them meets it, you know that the rest of them will meet the same standards as well. So that saves a huge amount of time as well. That there are these things that we can certainly look at. I can hear some muttering, which is not helpful. The contribution that really did take the biscuit, though, was that of the Chief Minister, who said that he was passionate about solving this issue. I'd love to see some evidence of this beyond words, because in this journey of trying to improve housing standards in the rental sector, he has been an obstacle. And it really, I think he had some cheek, frankly, in using the testimony of the Environment Minister and the Housing Minister, who are opposing this proposition. He used that testimony to say that is a reason for rejecting this proposition, because the two ministers whose portfolios cover that are opposing it. Well, how nice it would have been for him to have taken that approach when the original licensing proposition came to this assembly, when his Environment Minister and his then Housing Minister, myself, were wholeheartedly in support of it. He couldn't even bring himself to tell us in advance of that debate that he wouldn't be supporting us. So there really is a double standard here for him to pray and aid their testimony this time as a reason for saying no, when testimony previously was of no interest to him. So other arguments that have been raised in opposition to this, my favourite one is the argument about landlord opposition to this, sir. And it is because that opposition, as far as I can see, is a very small minority interest in this. I have lots of people in my life who I know and interact with frequently who are landlords. Some of those are people I'm very closely related to, and so who I trust and care about very much. Also some who I'm not related to, and I'm pleased to say, in fact, that there are many members of Reform Jersey, not states members, our ordinary membership, who are landlords who contact us frequently to talk about these housing issues because they're passionate about them too. And it is the case that the majority of landlords that I speak to out there in society are actually extremely welcoming of these sorts of initiatives. Those landlords who are already accredited with RentSafe will not be bothered by this proposition if it goes through, and they probably wouldn't have been bothered either by the previous iterations, the licensing schemes as well. It would have probably been an extra form they'd have had to fill in once every 5 years. Not too much to ask, really. And what it would have done is provided a level playing field for them, and for them not to be tarred with the same brush as the bad landlords that exist out there. And it is the case that there are some extremely bad landlords out there who I encounter frequently as a constituency representative. I have constituents come to my drop-in surgery, which I hold every week, and show me pictures of the state of property because it's not maintained properly by the owner of that property. I had a fantastic one earlier this week, sir, that as an experienced lawyer that you might find interesting, where somebody showed me a copy of their tenancy, which quoted the Landlords and Tenants Act 1954, which is extremely funny because that ain't a Jersey piece of legislation. It has no application in the island whatsoever, but there are jokers out there, frankly, who are putting that in Jersey contracts, completely at odds with Jersey law. That practice does exist out there, and there are people who are being made to suffer because that practice and that standard isn't being raised by the current mechanisms that exist. And theoretically, of course, they could still go to environmental health and make a complaint, but they don't. In many instances, they don't, because they believe they'll be subjected to a revenge eviction, they'll end up homeless, and they end up with nothing at the end of it. And that's why it's so important that whatever regime we have for minimum standards is a proactive system, not a reactive system, because then it takes the burden away from that person who is in the landlord-tenant relationship. It is the tenant who is the weaker one in the relationship, because they're the one who stands to lose the roof over their head if things go wrong. And they are often not in a position to be able to complain. And that is why having some stronger system would be much more effective, and a register simply won't cut it. Only some form of licensing scheme, or what's being proposed here, which is to make this compulsory, would achieve that as well. It's something that for so many good landlords out there, who would not be affected by it at all. Some of those landlords who are at the margin, perhaps those who think they're good landlords and are well-intentioned, but are, through no fault of their own, just maybe aren't quite up to date on what the legal expectations there are of them, will go to apply. They will go through that process, and they will very helpfully and free of charge be told, actually, you need to improve this, improve that, sort that out. And they can do that, and they will have saved themselves, actually, in the long run, probably a lot of bother. And for those at the very bottom end, we will have the option to kick them out of the market and say, you are simply not a competent enough person or actor in this industry to do that. And if that means they sell their property, I'm unconvinced that that's some sort of tragedy either. They can sell their property either to another landlord who will do a good job, brilliant. They may sell it on to a developer if the property is in such a poor state that developing it is the only option. I don't see why that's such a bad thing either, to get better quality housing at the end of it. Or, and this is my favourite one, or they'll sell it to somebody who ends up being an owner-occupier. So a greater opportunity out there for people to own their own homes and get the stability that provides. There simply is no downside to that. You have the worst operators in a market leaving it, replacing to be either replaced with stronger ones, or to provide more home ownership opportunities for other people. I can't see where the losers are in that scenario. And so with 27 seconds left to go, sir, I would like to ask members to support this proposition from Senator Moore as our 4th attempt in this electoral term to do something. And if we don't be surprised when you go to your voters in the election to have them ask you why you did nothing, literally nothing, to improve standards in rental housing. I would urge members to support the proposition, sir.
1 second to go. Conor Tarver, St John.
Thank you, sir. Sir, today I arrived with an open mind on this topic. Shortly after he was elected, I was happy to support the Housing Minister when he asked for more time. Here we are again, being asked for more time. Earlier today, we were asked by the Treasury Minister to support legislation to make things fairer. I voted for that, despite my concerns about the timing of the debate. Sir, we actually own the company that is the biggest landlord in Andium, and they have done a great job in improving their standards within their portfolio. Housing associations will then take up a large number of units. So what are we actually looking at? We already have 2,000 on the list. What are we actually looking at? We've heard about 20 extra staff being required. Well, what about technology? What about productivity? What options have been considered to get these properties registered and registered in good time? We had an interesting comparison earlier around the Eat Safe scheme being compared to a Michelin star. Well, the Eat Safe 1 star is a minimum standard, and the Rent Safe is about minimum standards. It's not about luxury accommodation, although those people who rent luxury accommodation deserve the same protections. I would have preferred if the report had looked at potential alternative solutions rather than just obstacles. The proposal is not an overnight solution. I would suggest that there could still be dialogue with stakeholders as any legislation is drafted. I ask members, would we be looking to delay this if it was health and safety legislation? Would we be looking to delay this if it was employment law? Would we be looking to delay this if it was legislation regarding financial services? We should be finding solutions. How can large landlords register multiple units in a short period of time? The proposal doesn't have a timescale for the legislation to be brought forward, surprisingly. And whilst I acknowledge Senator Mesick's comments about some bad landlords, let's not forget the vast majority of landlords are good, and they provide good quality homes for islanders. There is, as we heard earlier, far more work required to promote the awareness for both tenants and landlords about their responsibilities, because tenants also have responsibilities. But I'm shocked when I talk to landlords who aren't aware of their responsibilities, for example, around electrical testing and so on. So at the moment, sir, I'm with Senator Valois in terms of being on the fence, and I look forward to deciding which side I fall. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. And yeah, it's been very interesting, very good debate. I do fear that people misunderstand whether it's this proposition or its predecessors. This isn't minimum standards. The minimum standards are already there. That's the law. Minimum standards are the law. This doesn't improve minimum standards. This doesn't change that law. So any suggestion that this is about health and safety or employment law or analogous to that, it's just not correct. We have a minimum standards law, as was expressed earlier, 2018. Those minimum standards have been there for almost 4 years now. And they're quite rightly there. Those laws which already exist are analogous to health and safety and employment laws and so on and so forth. So it's really important that people understand that. This is about Well, I'll tell you what this is about, because I was on the scrutiny panel when the Environment Minister came to talk to us about why, in previous versions of this, why he was going down those routes. And we did very thorough scrutiny on it. But the Environment Minister said, quite simply, he wanted to know where the rental properties were. And I think everyone on the panel agreed with him. That's information that would be very useful for you to have. But what he brought out through the licensing scheme wasn't something which showed him where the properties were. It did a lot more than that. And that's where the problems arose. And the bit I'm struggling with here is, again, because I want to support this, is we need, or the minister needs, to know where they are, these properties. He doesn't need more than that. Anything more than that requires more people to be hired, government to grow again, more regulation, and now we know 20 people to inspect these. And why do they need inspection? And grandfathering doesn't work for this, because we know there's at least 8,000 properties, or we believe there's at least 8,000 properties which aren't on the scheme at the moment, so they can't be grandfathered in. So he would have to, at the beginning of this, you know, when the law came in, etc., he would have to inspect all 8,000 properties. That's an enormous undertaking. And my concern is that we're a tiny island that keeps saying, don't grow government, government must get any bigger. Why is the public service one of the strongest performing sectors of the economy? It shouldn't be. Why has the public service grown so quickly over the past 3 or 4 years? It shouldn't be. Well, if that's what we want, then why are we going to be bringing in legislation which requires us to hire more and more people to enforce things? We know as well at the moment that the Environment Minister is completely failing in his requirement to enforce planning laws, because his planning enforcement team is massively under-resourced. So how is he going to do this? This is the bit, because I want to, and I hope to speak to the proposer overnight to understand a bit more, because I want us to know where these properties are. I want the Environment Minister to have that information, that he can, should he wish to inspect a property, go in there and inspect it, because he knows where it is. The problem he has constantly told us, he told us in scrutiny, was not knowing which properties are rental and which properties are not rental. And that's where I keep falling down. It's where I fell down on the licensing proposals that have brought in before. It's not that I don't want us to know where these properties are. I actively do. I don't want us spending millions of pounds of taxpayers' money inspecting properties needlessly. That's what I find annoying. That's what I find really difficult to live with. And that's the bit I'm still struggling with, sir, is it just seems so, I mean, you know, it just seems so, I don't like this phrase, gets used so much, the old sledgehammer to crack a nut phrase. And that feels where we are. It's where I felt when we were discussing the commercial licensing, the licensing of commercial vehicles earlier. The other day I read that, oh, we want to rezone 2 fields in near the airport for a vehicle testing centre. This is all enormous stuff. This is all more requirements, more inspections, more regulation, more people needed in the public service. We don't have enough staff, as I said in the previous debate, even to staff our existing businesses, our existing public service, our existing organisations and charities. So how are we going to staff this? I'll tell you how we'll staff this, by paying loads of money, far over the odds, to attract people here to do the job. These are the bits that I find incredibly difficult to cope with when it comes to wanting to speak that. And I know, believe me, I know, if I vote against this, the Reform Party members to my right will go online, will slap a photo online with a target over my face. Now, if that's not an incitement to violence, I don't know what is.
I think that's crossing the line in terms of.
But that's what happened last time, sir.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not in a. I didn't see anything, and I'm not in a position.
But anyway,
to say one way or the other.
Anyway.
So I apologise earlier for a comment I made. It'd be nice if we had similar courtesy.
Well, I've seen the photo with me surrounded in red, bright red, photo of me surrounded in red. This is a landlord who voted against the licensing scheme. If the implication wasn't there, the implication wasn't there. But I believe it was, because I looked at that and I actually felt frightened. I'm allowed to feel frightened. I can't be ashamed for that.
That's not. No, this must stop. This cannot be exchanged. I understand feelings are running high but this must not be an exchange between members. All comments must be firstly made through the chair. Quite clearly, Deputy Morrell, you have suggested that you had in effect a picture up put there by Reform. The members of Reform in the Assembly have indicated that that was not them that did it. The chair is not in a position to resolve that one way or the other. I think that has to stay where it is. So if you would continue with your speech.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you, sir. So there is clearly these implications that are made if someone votes against this. I don't want to do that. I don't want that to happen. But at the same time, I do not want us to be spending millions and millions of pounds inspecting properties which don't need to be inspected, because the vast majority of these properties will not need to be inspected because they will be fine. We need a register. That I know. We absolutely do need that. Do we need larger licensing schemes? I worry that if we go down this road again, we are piling. We will need greater taxation. We will need more people to come in. We will need to grow again this government, the public service, in order to finance this, to do this. So I am also struggling. I want to support this, but I'm really struggling because I worry about what it means again for our government and where the island is going in terms of making it very difficult for people to operate here, whether it's entrepreneurs who want to start businesses but find it difficult because of the excessive regulation, whether it's all the areas I've met, the vehicle licensing and so on, which just not licensing, and the vehicles inspections. So I do worry about how we are going with government, and I worry how this grows government again, sir. But I will keep listening, and I hope there are more people to speak. I will keep my mind open, but that's the hurdle that I need to get across in order for me to vote for this, sir. Thank you very much.
Deputy. We've now reached the point where our standing orders require that I ask the Assembly if it wishes to continue. Perhaps we shall
adjourn, please, sir.
Well,
may I propose it?
There's a Deputy Masson has proposed the adjournment. Very well. The Assembly will stand adjourned until 9:30 tomorrow morning.